Nayab, Global Head, Payments, Innovation and Blockchain at Conduit. Tom Trowbridge, co-founder of Hedera Hashgraph. Ott Vatter, Managing Director e-Residency of Estonia. And our keynote speaker who will start his speech before joining the panel, Arthur Vailoyan, CEO of Bitcoin Swiss.
Okay, Marie-Louise, Hayastan, I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor, it's a pleasure, it humbles me even that we have here the opportunity to open up the morning on this spectacular day talking about blockchain applications. Tim asked me actually 2 o'clock in the morning how we really do that, and he asked that I do a wrap-up around the topic as well, a little bit of a historic aspect, because it's a heated debate, as we all know. Is it real? Is it here to stay? And I think it's a good moment to give at least some of my thoughts. And it starts with Ray Kurzweil, a deep thinker about technology, an innovator, which I obviously follow a lot. And he observed that technology in itself is not just accelerating. The pace in itself is accelerating. And regardless what historically happened actually, technology just progressed. And nowadays we have the famous Moore's Law. People are debating, is that the end? Of course not. After that epoch, something else will follow. But what is the problem behind all that? I think it's this non-linear expansion that troubles our minds. Because we have come to a point in time where this acceleration is becoming more apparent every day. And any new thing now changes sometimes even dramatically our lives. No wonder that we have people saying that's the end of the world, whereas other people see opportunity. And let me share with you a little thought experiment, which some of you would obviously know, because our brains are not able to think non-linearly. If I ask you to cross the street with 30 steps, 1 meter a step, it's not that a difficult problem to come to the solution. It will be 30 meters. If I prompt you to give me immediately the answer, if you do 30 steps, but you double the step, each step you take from 1 meter, 2 meter, 4 meter, etc. And I ask you, how long is the distance? Most of you would know, because you know 2 to the power of 30, but that leads to circling the Earth 26 times. And that's not something our brain easily gets. So with that, let's see what sort of disruption we face. Some of the nice stuff is some of us actually lived in areas in times where we had the blockbusters, where we had all sorts of massive gadgets around us, and it came down and down and down and came into what we nowadays have as the smartphone. Of course, we have other events which are probably a bit more disruptive. The famous Kodak moment, just to recall. Kodak moment was actually the term to describe a memorable moment, but it also turned into a disruptive term these days, because it was actually the very day Kodak went bankrupt. Instagram, with 13 employees, was sold to Facebook for $1 billion. So that is what technology also has in the cards. And it's just everywhere. It's just everywhere. Whatever we touched upon during those days is just accelerating in its pace and in its impact. But there was one thing missing, and the one thing missing was the e-cash. It was Milton Friedman complaining, looking at technology and its wonders. He said, where is my true digital currency application? And he called to the universe, and the universe gave the answer in the form of an almost mystical person. The paper appeared in October 2008, under Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody really knows who that person or group is, but timing is everything. It was the days where the world looked down the abyss. It was around September when Lehman Brothers just disappeared, when Merrill Lynch disappeared, and many other companies had dire stress. And it was this paper that I would say changed finance definitely. So it was in itself a revolution because there was a dogma. You can do anything but exchange value over the net, because uniqueness over the net was considered to be impossible with digital applications. I have not time, we will discuss with the group to go deep into what it is, but the magic sauce basically is make it public, announce it to the world, sign it cryptographically, an invention that has been done in 1976, and here it comes. The solution of the famous double spend problem was created on a very thin paper from Satoshi Nakamoto, and he took actually the courage not to publish in academia, no peer review, it was just out there, and he created the blockchain principle as the time stamping, an extra clockwork, the heartbeat of the system. So you need obviously people who do that, and it's called the miners, the entities that take the work, proof of work, to actually create the system, the consensus, that we have this ledger, that we have this blockchain that is immutable, that it's public, it's permissionless, it's censorship resistant. And they don't do it because these are people who don't care for their return. Of course they do. So you need to give them something, and you give them crypto assets. So in a way, crypto assets is an asset class you can consider, such as any other asset class we know, like equities that serve companies, etc. So maybe we can claim crypto assets serve decentralized applications. I think the D in the decentralized application is the key word here. So in a way, when it was created and launched, Genesis block, 3rd of January 2009, this was the first decentral application, Bitcoin as a dApp for payments. And it faced the trilemma. For those people who know about this, it's about scaling, security, and decentralization. You can only have 2 out of the 3. So Bitcoin was for payments, and soon after, new dApps came. Ethereum is probably best known to all of you, which was the decentralized application for computing with the application of smart contracts. Where do we stand? I think we entered at least the idea of a new era of money. So as it says, it's probably not even the money for internet, it's the internet of money, Andreas Antonopoulos. We can laugh, of course, but remember this. 1904 streets of New York, we have seen only horses, and if you look very carefully, you see 2 cars. People were laughing. Very important person said, this is just a fad, horses are here to stay. Only a few years later, the same streets of New York were full of cars, no horses anymore. Of course, this is not a proof to say decentralized finance will emerge totally, but we should be careful when we predict the world in a linear thinking and underestimate the impact of this. Now, a bit more from a theoretical standpoint, on the technical side, regulatory side, and token side, we have so many things going on. No time today to go through it. Some of the aspects we're going to discuss. Obviously, a huge debate, public, private, blockchain. Ethereum 2.0 is about to be discussed in depth right now in Osaka, DevCon. Proof of work, proof of stake, stablecoins. Libra appeared as an idea. Then jurisdictional fights. Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Malta, Gibraltar, they all try to take their stake. New laws are emerging, and obviously new standards are emerging. And when you talk token, such a broad term, you always hear things like you can use it for payment, utility, security, asset token, you name it. And so much more. So much more is in store. We will be all amazed. Ladies and gentlemen, I already come to the conclusion. Being faced with something new, it so happens that our brain sometimes is a bit puzzled, such as with this picture. Some of you might see two faces. Other of you see actually a vase. And I think what is a fact, it's the very same picture, and the interpretation is so different sometimes. People go to war even for that. Maybe a bit more lighter is this picture, and I tend to believe you immediately see what I see. I see two dancers, left and right. I'm not sure if everybody saw the same right away, but anyway, it teaches us a lesson that when we have the very same facts, we have the very different interpretation. And we as humankind should be so careful when we look into the future and just know what's going to happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, in this polarized discussion about blockchain, cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, with these cycles of delight and alarmism, I think we here understand deeply that in order to reap the promise, in order to control the perils we have, I make the claim that we have almost like a moral imperative to continue with progress for the better of us, for the better of humankind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for a great opening. I told Arthur to keep this PG, as this is a family program. I told him not to put that last slide on, but so we'll see if he'll obey the rest of the panel. So to start off, Barav Diaz, yes, there. Sava Anam, Tanam. All right, my pronunciation wasn't that good. So I'm Tim O'Regan, or as I like to go by in Armenia, Tim O'Regian. And I'm from New York, and I've been working in the region for over 20 years. I came to Central and Eastern Europe back in the mid-90s to work for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and have been working in the region since. So primarily raising capital for fund managers and projects in this part of the world and Africa. And it's my great pleasure to be the moderator of this distinguished panel. And I'm going to allow each of the panelists to do a 1-minute intro of themselves and why they're here and how they got here. And then we'll get into the thick of things. So, Ott?
Thank you. First of all, nice turnout for 9 a.m. Blockchain panel. My name is Ott. I'm from Estonia. I'm the managing director of the e-residency program, which is most probably the most informal part of government there is in the world. So we deal with verifying that you are who you claim to be. For example, Tim is actually Tim behind his computer. So we issue a digital identity and verify him physically so that he can buy stuff online and be verified online. E-residency goes together perfectly with blockchain developments and digital assets, because we need to know that the people actually are the people buying and exchanging the digital assets. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Para Luis Amemun, good morning, everybody. Very, very excited to be here. My name is Henry Arslan, and really my passion and my focus in life is the future of the financial services industry. And I'm just very lucky I do this in my professional capacity at PwC, where I run our crypto practice globally, but also in my academic life, where I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Hong Kong, where I teach fintech and crypto, as well in my author life and other roles, where I'm the chairman of the Fintech Association of Hong Kong, as well as an author where I just published my last book called The Future of Finance. Very, very excited to be here, really one of my favorite cities. And I just want to thank you all for making time today so we can all share with you all our passion for the future of finance. And my goal is that by the end of this panel, you can make your own decision on whether cryptocurrency and blockchain is going to have an impact on society and obviously on the future of finance. Look forward to sharing with you all. Shachunor Agalim.
Thank you. This works. I think there was a problem during the first one. But thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Really excited to be in Yerevan. My name is Nikhil Nayab. I work at the intersection of payments and blockchain. And I think of those two as slightly different. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to bring blockchain into financial services. My background is large banks, Citi and Credit Suisse. I think, as Arthur mentioned, I was right there in 2008 when banking as we know it in the US was collapsing. I've been lucky to be associated with blockchain for the past 7 odd years. Really glad to be here and looking forward to this panel. Thanks.
Thank you. It's great to be here. My name is Tom Trowbridge, first time in Yerevan. I'm very excited to see what type of crowd we have in Yerevan for this panel, which gives me great enthusiasm for the future of Yerevan and of Armenia. So congratulations to everyone here for being here and being interested in this technology. My background, I helped found Hedera Hashgraph in 2017, and as president built and led it over the past couple of years and left earlier this year. Hedera, just a minute on that to set the stage for later conversations, is a base layer consensus algorithm. And so for those of you familiar, and I guess many of you are, it's an Ethereum, but 1,000 times faster and 1,000,000 times cheaper. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, think of Bitcoin as a decentralized store of value or payments mechanism. And what Hedera is, following on the footsteps of Ethereum, is a layer that allows so much more than payments. And so it takes advantage of this technology to allow incredibly broad use of applications, whether it be supply chain, identity management, you could keep going, different types of decentralized finance applications as well. And so to give a sense of scale, while Bitcoin does about 5 transactions a second and Ethereum about 25, Hedera does right now 10,000 transactions a second. And so it easily will scale to 100,000. So it is a very fast, highly secure, and fair next generation protocol, which I think solves the scalability issues that you read again and again and again as plaguing the industry. So excited to be here and excited to talk a lot more about Hedera.
Okay, my name is Arthur Weilujan. I'm the CEO of Bitcoin Swiss. That's the oldest crypto service firm in Switzerland, by now 120 people. The firm itself has been established in 2013, so no wonder it was called Bitcoin Swiss, because there was no other than Bitcoin. We have trading and brokerage, storage, and ancillary services. We are actively designing and contributing to the market, proof of concept with stablecoins, and I'm happy to talk also about these aspects soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to get started, let's just do a quick recap of what blockchain is, so we're all starting from the same point of departure. So, say, Tom, you want to give us a quick overview of blockchain, just to kick things off?
I guess one way I think of blockchain and of Bitcoin in particular is easy example is if I were to give Nikhil $1 right now, he could later say I didn't give him $1. And I could say, yes, I did. So what do? How do we solve that? We use a bank. I use PayPal. I use a check. I use a credit card, right? We go through a trusted intermediary. And that ensures that that transaction happened, and we both trust that company to verify that transaction. What blockchain does is I give him this $1, and everybody in this room witnesses it. And because everyone here witnesses, we know it's happened. And he can no longer say that that didn't happen, and I can no longer say that didn't happen. And because everybody here sees it, you no longer need to have a bank. You don't need PayPal, you don't need a credit card, you don't need any of those intermediaries. And by the way, it happens fast. So I can do this right away. And if and think about this being in a different country. I'm in New York, I want to wire money to Armenia. Right now, how long does that take? Right? That could take a couple of days. You go through multiple banks, there's fees, etc. With blockchain, I can do that to someone I don't know, never met, in Armenia. They can have that money within minutes with certainty, and that is revolutionary.
Thank you. So over the last couple of years, especially in 2017, beginning of 2018, people were using the word blockchain any way they could just to raise money, putting lipstick on a pig just to get the buzz and to raise capital. For example, there's a company in Long Island in New York, which was a beverage company called the Long Island Iced Tea Company. And one day they decided that they wanted to explore doing something in blockchain. They didn't do anything. They just wanted to explore it, and they decided to change their name to Long Island Blockchain. The day that they did that, the share price, it was a publicly listed company, it jumped close to 300%. And nothing in their business had changed. They were still making iced tea. So we've seen a lot of use of a lot of terms just to raise money. So what I'd like to ask, let's start with Henry. What are good applications which make sense? And where is it that people are just using the term to put lipstick on a pig to raise money or generate buzz?
Great, thank you. First of all, just to reiterate what was mentioned before, I really believe this is the most exciting time in financial history. We're going to look back, in 50, 100 years at the period, the last 10 years, as a pivotal moment in the history of finance. And obviously, cryptocurrencies have a big role in this. One thing to understand is obviously the whole blockchain world is actually quite new. Actually, on Halloween Day, on October 30th, we'll be celebrating the 11th anniversary of that white paper that before we were seen online. This is a very, very, very new phenomenon. Obviously, where we saw a lot of Bitcoin and broader cryptocurrency awareness, and I'm sure many of you heard it for the first time, was last year, 2017, where obviously the price of Bitcoin went to almost 20,000 US dollars, and everybody was talking about it. Like any industry, there are great companies and people who are genuinely trying to change the world for the better and making finance better, including many of the companies you see here on stage. However, like any other new industry, there are bad apples. People to try to take a quick buck of the situation going on, and that's exactly what happened in 2017 as well. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to jail. I hope more people will go to jail over the coming years of some of the things that happened in 2017. But I would say that that being said, there's still a lot of innovation that's been happening in the field of finance. One of the big changes that happened following that was the regulatory clarity. This is quite interesting, where if you look at the crypto industry, it's probably the only vertical of financial services today that actively lobbies for more regulations. Why? Because people realize that we need some kind of regulatory certainty to provide comfort and put these bad apples away. Just to give you an example, this has happened. Today, according to Cambridge University, only 5% of regulators do not have somebody working on crypto internally. And I would even argue, I'm very lucky in my job. I deal with a number of governments, a lot of regulators around the world. I can tell you the average regulator that I speak with is way more knowledgeable on cryptocurrencies than the average financial services or banking professional. So I think things have changed quite a lot over the last couple of months, but unfortunately there's always been, like any industry, good people doing a lot of good things, but unfortunately a lot of bad apples as well.
Thanks, Henry. So, Nikhil, could you describe what situations you think it makes sense to use blockchain or a regular database? Like, when is blockchain being used superfluously?
So, reflecting more on my experience in sort of financial services and banking, I think if you look at why money moves slowly, and if you try to get to the heart of it, most people let money move slowly only because they don't know why are they sending money or why are they receiving money. It really is a data fragmentation issue. And what I've seen is, blockchain being applied in situations where the technology can alleviate these data fragmentation problems. Payments is a clear one. We can allow metadata to move with the money. I'm actually on the standards panel at the UK Payment Authority. And if you look at how the United Kingdom is thinking about a completely new architecture where the entire invoice information will actually accompany the payment. The invoice will be stored. There'll be repositories from where you can store the information, where you can pull the information. These sorts of use cases, payments being one, trade finance being another, very heavy document-centric. Lots of people need to receive information. They don't get it. Goods move slowly. Goods get stuck in ports. Lots of money is lost. Lots of value is trapped. So these, sort of situations are where I've seen blockchain to sort of find a really, really strong foothold.
So you mentioned invoicing. So why is a blockchain necessary? Why can't you just have one database, Amazon Web Services or Microsoft hosted in the cloud, and use that? So where are these ne'er-do-wells who are trying to take advantage of the system that require a decentralized platform to register this information? Why centralize or decentralize?
So I think everybody likes to receive the information in a manner that works for them. And when you look at large corporations, and everybody has a particular way of processing the information, processing the data, and nobody does it in only one fashion. No newspaper is alike, no web app is alike. There are common standards. So having a decentralized system, having nodes where data exists, and then you can pull on the data in a manner that works for you, is really why you need to be decentralized. And of course, if you look at sending and receiving files, which is what most financial services firms do today, that's highly inefficient. There isn't a single version of the truth. You end up reconciling what you believe to be true a number of times over. Within a trade's life cycle, there are at least 3 or 4 confirmations and affirmations that go on between counterparties. Highly inefficient, highly inflexible, just an enormous waste of money. So decentralization starts to ensure that everybody has what is the same version of the truth and allows people to access data in a manner that actually works for them.
So let's stay on this topic for a little bit, because I think this really warrants deep understanding. So if, let's say, it's Amazon Web Services, we all get together and we say, all right, this is going to be the repository for this information. We put the information up there. It's there once. We can all view it, we can all use it, we can all communicate through this one cohesive platform. So why decentralize it? Having nodes, tens of thousands of nodes around the world with many versions of the truth. Is that necessary? And if so, in what cases is it necessary? And in what cases doesn't it matter? And Nikhil, I don't want to pick on you, so Arthur, you want to take this away?
I can jump in if you want, because quite honestly, we should also be honest with the truth. As a matter of fact, dApps, decentralized applications who use those blockchains, it's a service. And when it comes to speed, user experience, cost, speed, scale, then you would say, I think central applications, central databases are 99% better on all aspects. But I think we have to understand, at least that's what I'm trying to extract here, is that when it comes to the little d, the decentral application, and what does that mean now? Your nice example. I think we live in an area, peer-to-peer. We live in an area where we have almost like libertarian aspirations, if you may say so, that we don't wait for others, that we have learned that trusted entities where we delegate power are not always to be trusted. Let's be honest, that the government per se is not a priori a good government, even when we have elected it. So with technology, a new phenomenon kicked in, that actually you can go away with all that and go peer-to-peer. But then you need something. And that's the decentral application with the blockchain we talked. And the very first killer app was right to the center. Payments, Bitcoin.
Another way, a couple of things I'd make it super specific. One, do you want to rely on a centralized database? It's certainly faster, but that leads to a single point of failure, whether it's a company, whether it's a data center, whatever it is. So a single point of failure, you're more resilient if you are decentralized, point one. Point two, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, to take that example and continue further, don't trust each other, don't want to share data with each other, don't want to, unlikely they will agree on protocols and everything else for one centralized database. If you have distributed with open APIs, they can access it and share data without having to trust each other. That is, I think, a critical piece of this. And when you add open source to it, you then bring in an entire community that is always developing, adding, enhancing features to whatever that application is, that any business that chooses to can access, get the benefit of both that innovation as well as not having to trust any of the other parties that are using it, and furthermore not be held up by a rent-seeking third party like an AWS.
But also, I think on a more broadly level as well, we have to be very honest. We're talking about payments right now. Today the global average fee of sending money is between 5 to 7%. In certain emerging countries, between two African countries, the fee of sending payments across the border next door is up to 20%. You know, I live in Hong Kong, and every time I have to send money to Armenia, for example, I'm shocked how difficult it is. So I think there's the practical use case where we're talking, but I think there's also the other element of really trust. I mean, we're very lucky here in Armenia. There's a central bank that we trust. You know, we trust a lot of the institutions. What if this conference was in Venezuela today? Would people trust it the same way? You know, but also when it comes to government features as well. One of them for me is, for example, land titles. You know, I'm a lawyer by background, and I find it unacceptable that the way we transfer land titles today hasn't evolved, whether it's a civil law country or it's a common law country. You know, from conveyancing in common law to how you have in many countries, unfortunately, it's still the case where somebody will have a house, a mortgage, and government official will change the records on the official records you have. And this is a very good example where for many countries where there's not that trust towards institutions, where blockchain can come and give this decentralized approach and actually benefit not only people, but actually society as a whole.
So I think a key takeaway here is that blockchain isn't a panacea for all that ails us. It's good in some situations, and there could be a hyper decentralized blockchain, there could be a relatively decentralized blockchain, and then there could be centralized databases, and every use case warrants a different solution. There's no one size fits all. So the Bitcoin blockchain doesn't necessarily fit all applications. So just depends is the answer to most questions, and it certainly is here. So we have a representative of Estonia here, and they've been heavy adopters and early adopters of this technology for lots of different uses. So Ott, would you please tell us what it is that you're doing and what your experience has been so far?
Thank you. So Estonia is a very small country. We have 1.3 million people, and we share a similar history to Armenia coming out of the Soviet occupation in the 1990s. Not too much resources. We like to joke that what we have is 50% forest and the rest is basically in between our ears. So coming out of the Soviet Union with no resources was a difficult time, and we actually made some very bold decisions. One was to have internet connection, high-speed internet connection in 1994-95 to public schools. And that actually spurred this growth of IT specialists at the end of the 90s, where the dot-com boom was happening, and a lot of companies actually grew out of it. And in 2000s, we implemented something called the digital identity. So everyone in Estonia has a digital identity which they use to communicate with the government. So we do not go to government offices physically. We do everything, also 98% of the transactions with the government we do online. And it's very important because it's efficient. It saves money, it saves time. Now, you ask, what about the data? Usually people do not trust their governments. And that is an issue. In Estonia, the trust level is very high, mainly because we haven't had any incidents, but we transact with the government on a daily basis, and we can't imagine without doing it, without our digital identities. So how do we actually came across blockchain was in 2007, we had the first ever known cyber attack from an aggressor, very familiar to you, next to our lovely country. And we took that attack as learning curve. So we created something called, which was the basis of a NATO Cyber Defense Academy, and we actually invented similar technology like the blockchain. So basically keyless signature infrastructure, which today keeps our data safe. So you might have heard about Estonia as the blockchain nation or the government that runs completely on blockchain. That's complete bullshit. What we do is keep our data safe. So we have our national health records, land titles, and a few other data sets that are protected by a technology that can be referred to as similar to blockchain. So we had a technology before blockchain as a term was coined, but we do not run on blockchain or anything like that.
So Arthur, can you walk us through where we started with Bitcoin, the deficiencies that were identified, how that morphed into Ethereum, and then what deficiencies were identified there, and what the next phase of the evolution of this industry is?
Yes, happy to do so. So Bitcoin came, and I think for those who saw it immediately, they were impressed, and it's fair to say it's a revolution, and it changed something, and maybe more than we think. Soon after, obviously, the limitations became very apparent, but Bitcoin never started out to be a broad application. It started out to be a payment system, or a app for payments. Then very smart people thought about how to further extend, and I think the next one was then known to everybody here, Ethereum Foundation, actually also in Zug. Zug was maybe also a nice place to be, because the mayor of Zug even was in 2016 accepting Bitcoin as payments for governmental fees, so that was quite a thing. So the environment was positive for innovations. 2014, around 2015, I would say Ethereum kicked in. That's a decentralized application for programming, I would say. A first in its kind, and still today Bitcoin and Ethereum are dominating the scene quite a bit. In 15, we had a guy, Fabian Vogelsteller, who used the opportunity of Ethereum platform and created an extra standard. That standard was called ERC20, and that was actually the origin of an immense frenzy, because that ERC20 standard allowed to program tokens as so-called smart contracts on Ethereum platform. And all of a sudden, you have many smart people, and also not only good people, who saw the opportunity, and we had a token revolution based on that standard. And on it went. Today we have, I think, over 200,000 tokens. We have at least 2,000 to 3,000 different standards on blockchains, and each and every next tries to do something better. What I see to do something better is maybe pick a topic that is not yet perfect, because Bitcoin in itself is narrow and a bit raw, and so they have chosen and picked a bit cherry picking of the very same ideas and make it better. Or come to complete new templates like what you just described, what you have invented, where it's about the ever same peer-to-peer information, authentication, integrity of data, tamper resistant, and down the road censorship resistant. So a huge evolution based on a revolution took place.
Thank you for that. So Nikhil, is Bitcoin now kind of redundant? Is it needed anymore, or has the technology moved on? And if it is worthwhile keeping it around, why?
So look, I think it's where everything started. It still has an enormous market cap. It is critical, I think, to understand where it came from, to know where we want to go. Because if you think about the evolution of the internet, right? Where did we start? In the 1960s, we started with, packet switching networks. It took about 10 years to create TCP/IP, another 10 years to create HTTP, 30 plus years to get to ecosystems, viable ecosystems where, you've got Facebook and people make real money. Bitcoin is where I think this revolution began. It's going to be here to stay, for sure. I think, the question is one of standards. How can we ensure that whatever we do in this sort of blockchain domain, in this crypto domain, we have sort of a standard to which many, many people play. That's one. And the second one is one about viable ecosystems where multiple participants can actually monetize, their investments, and there are sufficient incentives to kind of participate in an ecosystem. Is Bitcoin the foundation of that ecosystem? Yes, but is that where it will end? Frankly, had I had the crystal ball, I would say, my opinion, but I don't. And I think technology evolves once there is demand. Technologists have always solved for that demand. I think the past 10 years have been fascinating. The next 10 are going to be even more.
And who on the panel owns Bitcoin? Who owns Bitcoin? Okay. Yeah, so who out there?
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting question. How many here actually hold Bitcoin?
And who wants to donate some to the panel? All right.
I think I've done this sort of, many years ago, right? These sorts of conferences, and have asked the question, how many here have heard about Bitcoin? So let's start with that. Hold is the future, but how many have heard about Bitcoin? Pretty much everybody. How many hold Bitcoin? And how many use it to transact? I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands.
Pretty good,
Everybody's heard about it. It's a fantastic audience. Thank you so much.
Very interesting. Okay, so since we're all
But there's
holders
also
here,
an age thing as well. I think we have to be, I think to transact, Bitcoin is not, I compare it to digital gold, right? I would never go buy my coffee downstairs with a bar of gold. It doesn't make sense. I think we have to look at it how we use it for transaction as well. But I think it's also a generational issue as well. What I find very interesting is when I teach at the university and ask the same question to my students, they are all under the age of 20, often it's over 70 to 80% in the room that owns cryptocurrencies. And often if you want to know, at PwC, my best people that I find globally are the guys that we hire outside of university, right out of university. And this is what's interesting, such a revolution that having 10 years of experience, 20 years of experience in finance does not matter in this space, because a lot of the people you'll see that often, when you're having family dinner next time, ask your youngest member of your family if he knows Bitcoin, and you'll be surprised of the answer.
all right, so I have another question for the panel regarding Bitcoin. So you all hold it. Why do you hate the environment? So they say that Bitcoin mining today uses more energy than the country of Denmark. So to support this payment network, most of the trades out there, they also say, are 95% fraudulent on exchanges, just to churn volume, to get eyes on this asset and on exchanges. So a lot of wheels are spinning, but how much value is being created and at what expense to the environment?
I'm happy to take that. And so let's clarify, Bitcoin is not good for the environment. Let's be very honest with that, right? I mean, just to give you some data points on it, one Bitcoin transaction today, if I would send right now, let's say I would send to Tom one Bitcoin transaction, that transaction consumes as much electricity as the average US household consumes for 20 days. That's one transaction. An average right now, the network around this year, depending which country you look at, I use the data, it consumes as much electricity as Austria. It's not good. Then there's a whole ethical dilemma, whether we're happy to pay that cost, and also just because we're able to have a decentralized way. One I would compare though, it's if we go back to the slides that Arthur had before, I compare it, it's like when we came out with the first car in 1907 with the Model T. The first engine, it was loud, it was not very fast, it consumed a lot of gas. Now we have the Tesla. The good news I can tell you honestly now in the cryptocurrency space, we've moved quite a bit. We have a lot of new technologies that are consuming way less electricity in that. But it is what it is. I think we have to be very honest that from an electricity perspective, is not the most environmental friendly. But I have to say a lot of new generation of cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are coming in. There's different ways of actually where we're able to confirm transactions in a way more energy efficient way.
I think for Hedera uses about the minimum possible amount of electricity possible. So we're a green solution. But let me stick up for Bitcoin for a second. You have to pay for the power, right? So expensive power generation doesn't make sense to mine. What is the cheapest power? It's power that's not easily storable or transmittable. And most of Bitcoin power use comes from hydro, which is hard to store, is in faraway areas, and if it weren't used for mining, Bitcoin would go to waste. That is a story not widely reported. It's not as if you have coal plants that are generating all of this electricity that's using Bitcoin. So a lot of power has actually been created and is being used, mainly hydro, heavily in Mongolia, China.
Mainly though? But I mean China,
yeah,
there are coal belching plants that are cranking out electricity. A lot of the mining there is subsidized. In Canada and Iceland, you've got geothermal, you've got hydro, but you can't say that most of the energy going to mining is from hydro.
That's actually, there are statistics on it, so it is a big percentage of it.
So I would also defend a little bit the case for proof of work, but obviously share that, technology is not about status, it's a dynamic improvement every day, and it's non-linear. It's non-linear, so if we extrapolate the situation linear from today, of course it's a disaster. But Bitcoin proof of work uses energy, and obviously we share the same readings here. It's a fact that a large percentage of the energy used is actually coming from renewables. But referring to what I have said in my introductory remarks, it's probably, and here I'm referring to Peter Diamandis, abundance, his very deep insight in where we're going, also in energy, and he makes a super bold claim that 20 years from now, energy as a topic for humankind, or maybe 30, is solved. So maybe what we see today is the fourth T, but maybe in only a few years, that very topic that consumes almost the whole globe today is sort of solved thanks to the advances of the technology in itself. And of course, blockchain evolves as well. As I mentioned, proof of stake is a big answer to a next, etc.
So speaking of the evolution, we've been talking about Bitcoin, which is where this all began. It's also very much a part of our present. Let's talk about the future. So very recently, there was an announcement by Facebook and some of its partners that they're launching Libra, which they're saying will be the next generation of cryptocurrency. So who here would like to take a stab at describing what Libra is? Henry, you want to?
Sure, for sure. Okay, so obviously I think most people have heard about Facebook Libra. I personally think the announcement of Facebook Libra after the invention of Bitcoin 11 years ago, this month, is probably the biggest news we've had in digital assets. I believe in the history evolution of money, it will be one of the moments we're going to look back in history, say it was a pivotal moment. Obviously, it's very controversial, as you guys know. There's a lot. We can have a whole panel on that topic. What I would say, the catalyst, what does it enable? So the goal that the Libra community wants to have, so today I can send an email from Hong Kong to Yerevan in a second for free. If I want to send money, I'm going through layers of intermediaries, and for some reason, while we're able to send each other SMSs, WhatsApps, emails for free instantaneously, we're not able to do this with money. And the goal is to see if we can do this in the world of digital assets, leveraging the technology that was invented 11 years ago. How does it work? It's actually pegged to real currency. So the way that it works, instead of being only US dollars, it's a basket of currencies, including Japanese yen, Singapore dollars, a US dollar, which I think from the announcements is almost half of it. But it allows, let's say, if I'm an Armenian worker in Russia, or I'm an Armenian worker in Hong Kong, I'm able to send money back using the Libra network instantaneously, 24/7, with almost no fees. And with all these benefits, without the FX fees, transactions fees, banking fees that a lot of the intermediaries charge. So I think it's a pretty big development. It's going to be open source as well, so companies will be able to build on top of it and so on and so forth. This obviously it had a big impact. You know, personally, I think the biggest impact that it had was it woke up a lot of people. For example, a lot of central banks before, you know, today there's about 70% of central banks they are doing some kind of research on central bank digital currencies. This is where the central bank issues its own cryptocurrency. I think Libra really was a catalyst that for the first time, it kind of shaked everybody saying, wow, maybe we need to innovate on our side, because if we do not do it, the technology world will do it on its own. It's actually very, it's going to raise a lot of political issues, geopolitical issues, and also a lot of issues around monetary sovereignty and monetary policy as well. We can talk about these things if you guys want.
Okay, so we have a Libra lover in the house, which is good.
I'm a Libra lover, but
My
I would say
ex-girlfriend was Libra too. I'm a Libra lover too,
It-
I just want to say. But let's hear an opposing view. So Tom, you're itching to say
So
something.
yeah, I mean, I agree that Facebook making an announcement about recognizing and publicizing the benefits of digital assets and digital transactions is a terrific, has terrific benefits for the sector. However, I don't think there is one good thing about Libra. Not one. So, the technology is slow, centralized, and vulnerable to attack. There's nothing innovative about the technology at all. The governance is a flawed copy of Hedera that is also will result in a cartel with no real ability to move those people, remove those institutions. By the way, when you see the CEO of Coinbase advocating for Libra and saying it's in the interest of the US government, Coinbase just wants the people to trade it. They want to make returns from being a part of it. So there is no technological, governance, or other innovation at all with Libra. Now, and here's the question, they claim it's to help the unbanked. Sounds good. Where do most of the unbanked live? Bangladesh, China, Nigeria, Pakistan. All of those countries don't allow cryptocurrencies. That doesn't make any sense. And on top of it, if you wanted to help the unbanked, why go to the trouble of creating a new currency? Use a digitized US dollar, use a euro. Why are you going to educate someone who makes $1 a day on what the heck a Libra is? How are they going to know what that is? And if you really want to do it, you have your wallet have other coins, not just Libra, and you allow other wallets in Messenger. So every single argument about their rationale for it falls apart, and their implementation clearly indicates an entire other agenda. And what is that agenda? It's to sell financial products to their customers. And they are copying Ant Financial, which has the largest money market fund in the world. And if you use the metrics of Ant Financial, Facebook could add $500 billion to its market cap. They are trying to become the largest company in the world.
All right. Maybe as a good Swiss, I can take an intermediate step to that. And I think Libra, at least when it hit the news in Switzerland, I was also prompted by media immediately what our opinion is from Bitcoin Swiss. And I said, actually, what I like is that when I went to banks, and national banks even, I was invited to the Swiss National Bank to talk on other occasions. And then immediately, it was in the boardrooms. Immediately, it was on executive level, on C-level. Whereas if you knock the door and say, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin, they would laugh at you if they invite you. And so Libra brought the discussion where it has to be. Decentral finance. Of course, then we can argue, and I share quite frankly that it's obviously not a crypto asset as it has been invented by the forefathers, Bitcoin, etc. But it provoked a massive, high-level, highly politicized discussion, which across the globe, all of a sudden people hear blockchain, decentral, crypto, and I think that is the dialogue society has to lead, to choose then what we think is the right version.
So I think for all of its shortcomings, if you perceive them as shortcomings, one thing that you can't take away from this platform is the scale, which is what I think Arthur is talking about. So even if it's not the most innovative, even if it's not the best, Arthur was talking in his opening about the thousands of different cryptocurrencies, all the different projects and standards. Here you have this 800-pound gorilla coming in and saying, boom, might not be the best, but it's going to be ubiquitous with all these partners. And this might be what galvanizes this industry to develop standards that allow there to be critical and mass adoption. And I've talked to Nikhil quite a bit about how standards are important to really bring this industry forward. So Nikhil, talk to us about standards in the context of what we've been talking about here, and also capital markets, where you spent most of your career.
Yeah, I think I passed those remarks earlier. I think, you need, at the end of the day, there's 20,000 coins, there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Hedera, there's a bunch of other sort of, technologies. Engineers oftentimes come around and say, I can do faster than the previous project, build code that's actually more efficient, more faster. But at some point in time, you'll get into the VHS Betamax situation. And what will win is an ecosystem. What will win is an ecosystem where there's sufficient incentive for everybody to participate, and you don't leave them on the fences. Ensuring that standards actually are accepted, standards are actually deployed, and standards are actually implemented within the rails of industry as we know it, whether it's payments, whether it's trade finance, whether it's logistics, whether it's healthcare. There's a whole sort of raft of use cases on the healthcare side, which we haven't even touched, to enormous amounts of data privacy, issues that need to be resolved, so on and so forth. I think this conversation goes on and on. But what we need to do as an industry is ensure that we align ourselves to certain standards, to certain implementations of those standards, so we can start to create value and not spend electricity that a household uses in 20 days on a single transaction. But I think engineers will make the technology more efficient, standards will make it more successful.
Okay, excellent. Another thing that I think is worthwhile talking about is the model. Although it's not fully fleshed out, Facebook, the consortia, they're talking about pegging Libra to a basket of currencies, bank deposits, commercial paper, so instruments that are perceived to be relatively stable. Whereas Bitcoin has been whipsawed back and forth over the last couple of years. If you're looking for an instrument that can be used to trade, this could be a great solution. So although Tom claims that Hedera is a great platform and that Libra is just a knockoff, if you look at what happened with Hedera's HBAR coin over the last few weeks, it's been a total disaster. So when you have this type of volatility, how are you going to trade? How are you going to base any sound financial decisions on this type of instrument?
It's a very, very fair question. So context, between late 17 and August of 18, Hedera raised 124 million in a SAFT. The coin became available for trading on September 16th and promptly fell about 2/3. So went from 12 cents at the last round to between 3 and 4 cents now. Question is, what happened? First of all, crypto assets, their comps over that period of time went down between 30 and 70%. And so that's just general kind of market decline is some of it. But I left the company for a couple of reasons, and one of them was that since 2017, I felt it was important to be very aggressive in advocating and educating the community, developers, the market, and investors on what Hedera is. All these technologies are so new and so complicated, and there is so much noise that you cannot educate just by posting ads on social media and expecting people to understand and cut through the noise. This requires conferences, in-person discussions, and really telling people in person about how important these are and how different it is. You know, over that period of time, from late 18 until now, Hedera has launched the network. It has 12 top companies on its governance council, including IBM, Boeing, Tata, Deutsche Telekom, Nomura, DLA Piper, among others. And there's been tremendous progress, and I think this also presents an opportunity. On October 6th, Ethereum did 571,000 transactions. Hedera did 465,000. So almost 80% as many transactions. Hedera's been on for 3 weeks. Ethereum has been operational for 4 years.
But Tom, if we're talking about Libra as the comparison, commercial paper, bank deposits, Swiss franc, US dollar, I mean, it's apples and oranges. You've got stability there, and you've got no stability in those other instruments.
So the network is stable, and its usage is catching up to Ethereum incredibly quickly, and I think it's an opportunity. However, the coin
but why
is
wait
going
to
to
catch
be
up
volatile.
when Facebook could come in with a hammer and say, boom,
well, no.
these are instruments that are known, they're indexed, let's go.
I don't expect...
Why wait 5 years?
Well, no. I don't
here.
expect the Hedera coin to be used as a stable coin at all. Its function is not to transact with people. Its function is to provide security to the network. The more the network is used, the more the coin is valuable. That is the link, and it provides security. It's not supposed to be a stable coin. It's a completely different use case than what Libra is. But rather than use Libra, why not have a digitized US dollar? You know that's stable. Why would you create a basket of currencies that are completely at the discretion of the user and have to result in you doing constant calculations to go back to fiat to figure out what it's worth? So I guess I'd say on the Hedera point, the opportunity is with this coin falling, the network is functioning incredibly well, and it's an opportunity for everybody to participate in the success and growth of this network via that coin. So all
right, so let's transition to another coin. So we talked about the USD coin, that's great, but I want to talk about a real powerhouse in central bank issued cryptocurrency, and that's S-Coin from Estonia. So this is something that was talked about a couple years ago. Let's get into why it was proposed, what problem it was meant to solve, and then why ultimately it did not come to fruition. Or maybe will it?
Good question. The same what's the case with Libra is that you need support from the government side. Ultimately, for it to be a success, you need the support of central banks because your societies work with the central banks at the moment. So what happened, some of you might have heard about S-Coin. What happened a couple of years ago during the boom of cryptocurrencies and ICOs was that we had Tim Draper visiting Estonia, and he was visiting e-residency, which is a government program, meaning that it's paid by the taxpayer. And Tim Draper was very eager to invest in e-residency, but we couldn't accept any investment because we're a government program, right? And then we started to figure out ways how we could actually part from the government to privatize it in a way, and we wanted to give back to the community, involve the community a bit more. So we kind of wrote our own little white paper, what if a government would offer tokens in exchange for actually right to participate in the decision making of a governmental program, giving them digital identity and tokens and such. And ultimately what happened was that in a press conference in Brussels for the European Bank, unprofessional journalist asked Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, that what do you think of Estonians' plan to abolish the euro and substitute this with Estcoin? Which, after Mario Draghi said, it's complete nonsense, this can never happen because Estonia is in the eurozone. Absolutely true. We never wanted to abolish the euro and then change it to a token. But that spurred a very vivid discussion in the media, in the industry, and in among central banks. And I had to answer very difficult questions to our president and prime minister, and almost got our program closed. So that's what happened with Estcoin. So we proposed an idea. What if governments would think this way? So it was a bit ahead of its time, and unfortunately the press ruined it. So today I can say that likely in Estonia there will be no Estcoin, unfortunately.
But to the defense, I always say, if you're a central banker and you love Bitcoin, I mean, you're crazy. It's a bit like a taxi driver being excited of seeing Uber or like Gigi here come in the market, because obviously you have no control, and so on and so forth. The one thing I would mention, though, I think it's important, the ECB has done, the European Central Bank has a number of papers on this published, but they explicitly say that cash, good old cash, if you really want to have private transactions that nobody else wants to know, cash is still king. I always say to many audiences, if you want to launder money, you want to buy drugs, do something illegal, do not use Bitcoin. You will get caught. And we don't have time on this panel, but every transaction is traceable. A lot of new technology coming in. We're able to trace a lot of transactions. But I think the one thing that's important to understand is a lot of central bank is a risk. Because, and this is there's a lot of research on it as well by the ECB itself, that if they issue a central bank, there's a risk that people will take their money away from banks and buy a real risk-free asset, which is issued to a central bank, which may cause systemic issue, rise of interest rate, and financial instability. And this has been, there's been a number of cases on this. However, for central banks, I've been very smart. Like I mentioned before, about 70% of central banks are looking at it because there's a lot of advantages. One, if you want to know what's the economic activity of your country. Today, we all do GDP estimates after 3 months, 6 months. They're a bit of finger in the air, often based on surveys that have been issued 20, 30 years ago. If everybody was using a central bank digital currency, I can know the economic activity of my country live. Second, corruption, which is a big priority for many governments around the world, including in this region. If you really want to bring down corruption, cash is the worst thing for corruption. Central bank digital currencies, you can trace, and you have a lot of benefits. And as technology is evolving, there's a lot of things we can put in place. Think about capital controls. You can still put cash in a luggage and move a border, but with central bank digital currencies, I really believe there'll be a day where you can actually embed those inside the currencies as well. So that's why it's very exciting. Like Libra, like everything else, we have to experiment. We don't know which one is going to win, but we all have a duty intellectually and as a society, and for all the better of humanity, to experiment. I don't know which one it is. Maybe it's going to be Hedera, maybe it's going to be Bitcoin, maybe it's going to be Libra, but we have to push and we have to innovate. And I have to say, I'm very proud. Generally, most countries around the world, regulators, central banks, policymakers have been encouraging it, but it's not easy. And I know Estonia as well. It's not an easy position to be a policymaker in this new vast era, but honestly, I'm very optimistic about the future of finance, especially in this era of digital currencies.
Some very good insights, and you've just heard that if you need any counsel when it comes to laundering money or smuggling, then PwC is the firm for you. So Henry is there for it. I think that was a subtle plug, right? Editor, scratch that. So let's move on to security tokens, which is an area which I'm very passionate about, and it's actually what led me to spend a ton of time in this space. So it was when I was raising money for an African private equity fund manager a number of years ago that I started studying how the rails for Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain could pave the way to digitizing real-world assets. So real estate, private equity funds, royalty streams, gas wells, you name it. So now we're at the dawn of an era because of all the forefathers that we've been discussing over the last hour or so, to have a digital representation of ownership of an asset, which typically we have representation of in a stack of documents like this. So now, just as easily as you can trade a Bitcoin on your phone, you should theoretically, in a number of years, be able to trade a fraction of a piece of real estate, or a fund, or a royalty stream. So there's a lot that's happening in this space. There's a lot of promise, but like anything new, it's taking a while to get adoption and to iron out the wrinkles. So I think for the balance of our time, it would be great to hear what it is that people are doing. Henry, let's start with Nikhil. Different applications that you see for security tokens in capital markets where you came from. And then Henry, it would be great to hear how some of your customers are thinking about using this technology too.
So look, I think at least within the United States and many other countries, right, when you trade stock, when you traded stock in the 1970s, you walked around town with pieces of paper, you signed at the back of the piece of paper, somebody kind of matched your signature, and then stock was eventually transferred many, many, many days later, right? But that is not the case today. Securities are completely digitized. Land titles perhaps are not, and certain other asset classes are not. So well then, what's the real sort of problem? The real problem is that the rails on which these industries run, these rails are simply outdated and broken, and they don't service the new digitized generation that Henry talked about, right? Sort of things need to happen in an instant. Value needs to move really, really fast. It's not tenable to say the fastest way to move money is actually stuff it in a suitcase and carry it across the border or carry it in a plane, right? You can download movies instantly. You need to be able to kind of transfer value instantly. And I think security tokens play into that region where they take, in certain cases, already digitized assets and put them onto a new set of rails. And in certain other cases, such as land titles, actually enable a fresh wave of digitization to sort of come into that industry. So, I think it's sort of, in some ways, it's calling the same thing something different, depends on the industry. And in certain other ways, it's going to unleash an entirely more efficient way of kind of doing business.
Yeah, maybe related to that is a tokenization as well. So obviously this was a cover of how banks and the infrastructure is working. But I think another big revolution coming in with security tokens is tokenization. I'll give you a very simple example. If tomorrow I want to go buy this big building, personally I don't have the money to come and buy this entire big building. And that's why for many large assets, think big buildings in Yerevan and others, there's an illiquidity discount. Because only a couple of people or groups can buy this. But what if I took this entire big building and I separate into 100,000 pieces of, say, 10,000 dirham? Then anybody can buy slowly parts of and get exposure to such a large asset. And that's why I obviously creates more liquidity because people can trade such assets. But also, if I put my lawyer hat on, when we talk about securities, you're allowed to completely streamline corporate actions. The way right now companies, listed companies, public companies do voting, dividend payments, it hasn't changed for the last 20 years. It's actually completely ridiculous. We will move to an era, and I talk about this in my book, where we're going to have probably daily dividends, or maybe monthly dividends, because we're going to have this liquidity from this perspective. And what I think is the access, democratization, tokenization will happen for everything. I could maybe tokenize my apartment, give away 20% of it, allow more people to access it. It really has many, many benefits from a financial perspective. I think that's a very, very exciting development. Again, let's experiment.
And let me tie that into our highest profile speaker. There's a book called The Unincorporated Man, came out in 2009. It imagines a future 300 years from now where every human is tokenized. And you can trade the stock, effectively, the token of every human. So who here would be good for tokenization? Kim Kardashian should be tokenized. And I guarantee you she'll be one of the first to do that, where you'll be able to buy a share of her revenue down the road. And I think that is a future that is coming faster than we think.
Thank you. Do we have any more time? Or that's it? Okay. So I think we only have a couple more minutes now. So I'd like to wrap up with everyone talking about how these technologies, these instruments that we've been discussing, apply to Armenia. So what are some things that could be done with these technologies to improve the situation here, to foster economic development here? What are some of the ideal killer apps of these technologies for Armenia?
I think the killer app number one is human beings. that you have intellectual capacity. I think copy-paste a little bit what Switzerland is trying as well, to position itself in a resource-tightened environment, that you could further develop the capacity of the people. And definitely IT is on the roads, and very much so. Armenia is already very famous for that, but some of the topics can be picked and chosen, and this is definitely in the decentralized finance area, where you can tap into this enormous potential of human beings to have a voice when it comes to frame and make a better world also around this topic.
Two comments. First, buy Bitcoin. Second,
not HBAR?
And second, research Hedera, and here's why. When the internet came out in 1997, no one could imagine Uber. You couldn't imagine Google Maps. You weren't able to imagine the type of applications we now take for granted on our phones. And so if you understand the power of decentralization and what you can do with speed, because by the way, all those applications came after broadband happened, right? In a 56K modem world, you couldn't have Uber, you couldn't do Google Maps. But imagine speed. And so going to the human capital, Arthur's point, right? It's the human capital, it's the innovation in this room and around the world that's going to take advantage of the speed and decentralization to create applications that I can't even conceptualize. So I turn it back to you to see what you can create on this technology.
I think it's been amazing to be here and see the energy in the room, see the energy in the conference, see the kinds of things that companies like All.me are doing. I think I had a chat with their founder, and I think it's just fascinating where the minds are actually looking to take this digitization of this country. I think a lot of business still takes place in cash, and as you're moving from a physical cash, moving away from physical cash, some of these technologies might truly help you leapfrog that inefficient period of time that many countries around the world spent in running a transaction using, for example, a credit card rail, but then actually moving the value 3 days later. You might be able to skip that and sort of move into a more real-time movement of value. And I think there's enormous opportunity to be had. Looking forward to some of the experiments that will come out of this country. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hey, Henry, before we go with you, we're going to come back to you, but we have a native Armenian who's actually creating a token, who I see in the front row here, and I'd love to hear why it is that he and All.me, so feel free to stand up, Artak, has decided to create his own token to serve the Armenian market and countries farther afield. So Artak, could you give an introduction to yourself and the token, and why you decided to introduce a token rather than using dram, dollar, some other type of means of exchange?
Yeah, thank you. First of it, we create these tokens on an All.me platform. And Tom and Arthur, thank you very much. You are asking very important things for blockchain technologies and digital assets. You are mentioning on it. We already create the things what they are mentioning. So we are create the first ecosystem and the first digital asset. When you can use it inside of platform. You can earn it, you can transfer it, and transfer will be done more than possibilities, more than 100,000 transactions in 1 second, and free of charge. So any Armenians who are living in Australia or Russia or US, they can transfer in 1 second to home, and you get it. And they can monetize it inside of platform. So how many users we have, how many people they are, more items in Me Market, which is C2C platform, which is no charging any fee between the clients. And blockchain is very important in this case, that as mentioning Henry, the key thing is that don't giving possibility to do any cash back what's happening around the world. So all governmental structures, lot of structures that are fighting against of not only terrorism, but I'm asking financing terrorism, which money is going right, left, and they can control. So this is giving transparency. This is a very important thing to get, to be transparent and white, go forward. So welcome, we have these Me tokens, which we have, and every day is growing up And transactions, we are doing around of more than 350,000 transactions per month, because we have around 1 million users today, but without any marketing, but we are doing more than 350,000 transactions per month.
Wonderful. So here, the future has already arrived right here in Yerevan. Thanks, Tarek.
So
Thank
the
you.
things what you are mentioning, we have already. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
Thank you.
Henry?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you all for having been here. And I know you have a lot of choice of stuff to do. And thanks you for allowing us to share our passion of the future of finance with you all. The one thing I'll leave you with is that digital assets, you should not look at them as a vertical. It's all the other topics that were discussed at Wcit. It's like fintech, blockchain, IoT, AI. And it's when you add these together, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2, it's a 1 + 1 = 22. Because there's an exponential element. And I'll give you one example, is when you start putting all this stuff that discussed together, that's where you see the importance. For example, today, all of you, all of us, let's say we put our data on social media. We post pictures on Instagram or Facebook and others. You know, we're actually not getting compensated for our data. You know, I really believe that in our lifetime, all of us will be able to monetize our data. You know, and maybe the price of the data, maybe I'm a normal guy, I have a 9-to-5 job, my data is not worth that much. But Mikhail maybe is an athlete on the weekends, and his data is worth way more than mine. So we'll be able to price, there'll be AI algorithms that we price the value of the data. The way we'll be sharing this is via tech platforms, and the way we'll be compensated for this is going to be via micro payment, crypto payments that are only possible in digital assets. You cannot do SWIFT transfer for a fraction of a cent. So I think when you look at all these elements coming in together, we have to look at it holistically, everything coming in. And this is why I always say we are going through right now the most exciting time in financial history, and very, very excited to be able to share part of it with you all. Thank you very much.
There are a lot of Armenians not in this room and not in this country. I think you should bring them back, if not physically, then virtually. Explore digital identities. Give them an opportunity to participate in your economy. Let them create companies here using digital means. Explore opportunities of digital identities. I think it will be very useful for your country. Thank you.
So I'd like to say thank you to all our panelists. I think this has been wonderful. And Snora Galushin to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, the panel. Can we have one more round of applause while they do their selfie, please? A bit more, please, a bit more. Thank you. We're going to go straight in to our next panel. One of these guys have finished their photograph. And this panel is Prometheus Bound, When AI Meets Geonomics. Prometheus being the guy that stole fire from the gods. Knowing Jamie Metzel, the moderator, he will be as fiery as Prometheus.
So everybody over there, if you'd like to be part of the conversation, please join us over here. And to get ourselves in the spirit, with everybody focused on our mission at hand, I'd like to get everybody to stand up. Everybody stand up. Everybody, everybody. Good, because it's the morning and it's the third day, and some of you have been here for all 3 days. All right, and everybody, reach your hands up in the... All right, and then twist to the right, and twist to the left, and shake your head around in a circle, and now turn to your one side, say turn to your right, turn to your right, and there's a person next to you, give them a high five to one side, and now the other way, to the person on the other side, give them a high five. And now give yourself a round of applause because you're so dialed in and you're so focused, and we're going to have a great conversation. And now everybody sit down. Good. All right. Now we are ready. Oh, and I have my friends from Fuck Up Night here. So this is great. All right. So we've been here. This is our third day, and we've been talking about many ways in which technology is going to change all of our lives. And technology has always, for many, many years, for tens of thousands of years, technology, and hundreds of thousands of years, technology has changed our lives in deep and fundamental ways that have transformed not just the way we live, but our genetics. And we think about fire and the way fire changed the way that we consume food and the impact that had on our brain capacity. Or farming, and farming allowed us to increase population density and live amongst our animals. And then we had these diseases that jumped from animals to humans and would at a go wipe out a third of us, fundamentally transforming our genetics. So the question for us is not, will we transform our genetics using our technology? That is, in fact, the history of our species. The question is, how will we impact our genetics using our technologies? And how can we make sure that we do so in a way that optimizes benefits and minimizes harms? Because we are at the beginning of an exponential technological revolution with more people connected to each other, with superconvergence of technologies that we'll talk about today that are driving technological change forward faster than ever before. But because we're on an exponential J-curve, it means that the speed of change going forward is accelerating. It's so when we think about a unit of change, we are being too conservative if we think historically about the pace of change. And so we all need to begin preparing ourselves for a future that is going to arrive far sooner than most of us believe or are prepared for. And the fundamental transformation at the intersection of genomics, big data analytics, AI, and other technologies are in many ways going to challenge our traditional conceptions of what it means to be a human being. When Watson and Crick identified the double helix structure of DNA in the 1950s, what they were doing was identifying that there is essentially a book of life structured in the double helix. And with the culmination of the Human Genome Project in 2003, we identified that the book of human life could be read in the A's and C's and T's and G's, the letters of the genetic code. And now, at the beginning of the age of human genome editing, we are recognizing that the book of human life can be written and rewritten. Readable, writable, and hackable. These are the attributes that we think about when we are experiencing our information technology. But these increasingly, the central message of what we are going to be talking about today is that all of biology, including human biology, is readable and writable and hackable. And that is going to have absolutely profound implications for all of us, because we're not talking about some science fiction future. What we are talking about is the science today. The genetics revolution is not just coming, it's already here. And it's going to play out with greater velocity and a greater and greater impact on our lives. And even those of us who think and feel, well, this seems like something that's far away, need to start preparing now. There are three main areas where the genetics revolution is already touching us, and we're going to talk about those in our panel. The first is in healthcare. When people think about genetics, they think about healthcare, and we already have treatments, some of which have been talked about in this stage, using genetic technologies to do things like treat previously incurable cancers, things like what it's called CAR T therapy, where you take out blood cells and edit them to give them cancer-fighting superpowers and put them back into your body. But it's going to something much more profound is happening, is that these overlapping technologies are allowing a transition from generalized healthcare, which is what we experience now. When you go to a doctor, you are treated based on your being a human being, based on population averages. So if you're getting most cancer treatments, it's because you have a certain type of cancer, and there's a certain percentage chance the treatment will help you, a certain percentage chance it will do nothing, and a certain percentage chance it will harm you. And that's why in most cancer treatments, you try the first line of medications, let's say. If that doesn't work, you go to the second and you go to the third. But very quickly, we are going to move from our generalized system of healthcare to precision healthcare. And precision healthcare means that you will be treated based on your individual biology. Not just that you're a human, but that you are you. And so when you go for your treatments, how is your doctor going to know who you are? Well, they're going to have your personal history, your family history, your information from sensors that will be in and around your body. But the most important piece of information that they are going to have is your sequenced genome. And everybody, relatively soon, we're going to have our whole genomes sequenced at maybe a couple days after birth, or even before birth. And right now, when you're born in most hospitals, you get a little heel prick blood test. It tests for a certain number of disorders. Everybody is going to have their whole genome sequenced at birth. And when that happens, we are going to have a ton of genetic information. It's estimated that we'll have about 2 billion people with their sequenced genome, with their genomes sequenced within a decade. But if you sequenced everyone on Earth, as we'll talk about, it wouldn't mean anything unless you could compare their genetic information to their phenotypic information, which just means information about how those genes are expressed over the course of their lives. And bringing that information together is going to allow us to increasingly crack the code of complex human genetics and complex human biology. And that's the way we're going to identify how our genome and how our systems biology more broadly works. And so our healthcare is going to be personalized based on this ever greater knowledge of who each of us are as individuals. But when we have that information, we are going to very quickly transition from a world of precision healthcare to a world of predictive medicine, healthcare, health, and life. And that means that when your kid has this blood test just after being born, we're going to know a lot about disease risks that kid may have 40 or 50 years into the future. How are we going to think about that? How is that going to transition the way we think about health, the way we think about lifestyle, the way we think about prevention? And that's going to change us very, very quickly. But we don't have a disease genome. or a healthcare genome. We have a human genome. So our genomes aren't just telling us about our diseases, they're telling us about who and what we have the range of potential to be. And we're going to have all of that information, which isn't just going to transform healthcare, but through direct-to-consumer genetics, we're going to have information about probabilistic outcomes of our most intimate, personal, and human traits. Things like the genetic component of IQ, the genetic component of personality style, all of these attributes that we attribute to fate, maybe even to parenting, we are going to increasingly, but not entirely, see as the result of genetics. And then the killer application of these technologies is going to be their application in assisted reproduction. And we're going to use these technologies to change not just the way we make babies, but the nature of the babies we make. And we're going to do that over time because more and more of us are going to conceive of our children using advanced science. That means that conception will move outside of the human body, which is another way of saying we will use sex less to make babies and use science, so increased reliance on in vitro fertilization, IVF. We'll use more embryo screening of pre-implanted embryos, which is something that exists all around the world, including already in Armenia. But we'll be able to make selections based on this much greater understanding of genetics and of semi-predictive genomics. And then we're going to increasingly do what has already happened, which is use precision gene editing tools like CRISPR to edit the genomes of pre-implanted human embryos. Many of you may know that the world's first 2 CRISPR babies were born in China last year as a result of what I view as the incredibly unethical, irresponsible actions of a Chinese biophysicist named He Jiankui. And I'm part of the World Health Organization International Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. We've put out a very strong statement condemning what he did and saying that we are not ready for genome-edited babies. But we will be. This future is coming. And it's scary for a lot of people. It should be scary. But it also should be exciting for a lot of people because we have young kids, infants, who are dying from deadly genetic diseases. And if we have the ability to eliminate those diseases and save those kids' lives, in my view, once we can do that safely, it would be unethical not to do it. But that doesn't mean that we have to live in a world where anything goes. Because there are a lot of pressures that are pushing this process forward. There are pressures because we are just different. We're different within our communities, within our countries. We have lots of different views. Our countries are different from each other. There are some places that are extremely restrictive. There are some places that are extremely permissive. And there are some places where they haven't really thought about it, these regulatory vacuums. And that's one issue. But then we're all very competitive with each other. I have a friend in Korea. He has 11 tutors a week coming to his house to tutor his 12-year-old daughter. In Korea, there's a national law that the cram schools need to close at 10 p.m. because people were having their 7- and 8-year-old kids stay out past midnight every night to study for the college entrance exams 1 decade in the future. And when I told my friend, I said, you know, there's this technology, it's coming, you are very likely going to be able to select from among your, let's say, 10 pre-implanted embryos, to select one with the likely highest genetic component of IQ, and Steve Hsu will talk about this in a moment. Would you do it? And that guy, my friend, looked at me like I was a lunatic. Like, of course I would do it. Everyone I know would do it. Who wouldn't do it? And there are some communities where that may be how people think. There are other places where people could look at me with that exact same look and say, who would do that? That would be insane. These are your children. Just love them for who they are and whatever comes. And here's the tough thing. If you clapped for the first proposition, if you clapped for the second proposition, you're both right. Because what we're talking about are just different values that different people have. And so given this difference, we are going to have to find a way of negotiating a compromise. And it's really difficult because let's just say I'm someone who believes that these technologies should be banned and never applied. How far should I be willing to go to stop you from doing what you want to do? Or let's say my country decides to opt out, but your country decides to opt in. Should I lobby for you to change? Should I have some kind of military blockade? Should I invade your country to prevent you from doing this thing that the people in your country want to do out of the argument, well, wait a second, we're all Homo sapiens. If you do it and we don't do it, what if your children pair up and make babies with our children? What happens then? So these are really difficult and complicated issues. And they trigger fundamental ethical questions that we're going to need to grapple with. How do we think about messing with complex systems that we only very minimally understand? What do we think about equity? Who has access to these technologies? And what happens if we have different levels of access? I mean, we've seen throughout history what happens when the Mongols have better stirrups and bows and arrows than everybody else. When the Europeans have better ships and guns than everybody else. I mean, we've seen what happens with technological advantage. Will this be another domain where that is realized? It could be, but that is in many ways the question that's up to us, is what kind of world do we imagine, and how can we work together to build the kind of world that we would like to live in? Issues of diversity. Some people think of diversity as a way to have a really effective business if you have different kinds of people thinking different ways, or a university. But diversity is something much more. It's our sole survival strategy as a species. If we didn't have genetic diversity, it's not that we would have been stuck at our single-cell organism phase. All of those single-cell organisms would have died because when the environment changes, you have to change. And that's what diversity is. It's our long-term investment in population resilience. But what happens if, because of social norms, everybody thinks they want a certain kind of child, maybe tall, outgoing, with a high genetic component of IQ or something else? So these are really deep and fundamental questions. And because this future is arriving sooner than we expect, each of our responsibilities are so much greater than they feel. Because if you feel like, well, this is a conversation about the long off future, then you can say, well, I'm just going to go back to my life. But if you recognize that this future is now, it's happening, I hope that your takeaway from our conversation will be a sense of, first, I better learn about this stuff, and this is like the intro teaser to bring you into the conversation. And two, meaning everyone here, I better get involved. I better start talking to people in my community, asking questions of my government leaders. As a matter of fact, you'll have your prime minister on this stage this afternoon. You can ask him if you'd like. Because this future is coming, we're not ready, and it's up to all of us to work together to try to build a future that embraces the incredible wonders of these technologies to enhance our health and longevity and all of these things that I think we would want for ourselves and for the people we love. but they also, and we need to be honest about it, come with dangers. And the question is not, I always say this, the question is not technology yes or no. The answer is technology yes. Technology is coming, we can't stop it. But what we can do is make sure that we're doing everything we can to use our best values to guide the application of our most powerful technologies. So with that, we have a really incredible panel of people to dig in to these issues. And so I'm going to give everybody just 1 minute to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, in the context of this topic, what are the issues that you're most focused on, and then we'll circle back and start the conversation. Lakshmi, would you go first? Thank you.
I'm Lakshmi Parida, and I'm from India. I was born in India and had my early education in India and moved to the US where I did my PhD, and after that I've been with IBM Research, and my background is in computer science and mathematics, and I have been applying it to questions in biology and genomics, and my thesis was on genomics, and I've been working in that area for the last 20 years, and now I am an IBM fellow, a master inventor in IBM, and I lead the computational genomics group. I'm the strategist for diseases, understanding diseases, and also strategist for applying mathematics in healthcare and life sciences. So my research has been around genomics and how to use information technology and algorithms to understand basic questions there. Thank you.
My name is Steve Hsu. I'm from the United States. I am the Vice President for Research at a university called Michigan State University. My background is theoretical physics, but in the last 5 or 10 years, I've mainly been working on AI applied to genomics, using machine intelligence to predict complex aspects of a human from their DNA. And we've now reached the point where, for example, from your DNA alone, we can predict how tall you will be, plus or minus a few centimeters. So if I go to a crime scene and I get DNA from a gun, I can tell you the man who shot this gun is 183 centimeters, plus or minus 3 centimeters. And that has never been possible before, but just in the last year or two, huge breakthroughs have been made, not just in the ability to predict height or IQ, but also in the ability to predict which individuals are most likely to have which disease conditions. So which women are 10 or 30 times more likely than the average woman to have breast cancer. Which men are 10 or 30 times more likely than the average man to have a heart attack. All of this capability is only 1 or 2 years old, and it's mainly due to AI and very large genomic data sets. Data sets have been analyzed now with 1 million individuals in the set. Now, Jamie mentioned assisted reproduction. In some countries like Denmark, almost 10% of babies born today are born through IVF, which means they were originally embryos in a laboratory, and the parents had to choose which embryos to implant that would become their child. And so now we can actually predict some of the qualities of each of those embryos if they were to become an adult human. This is the first time that that capability is possible. Currently, worldwide, about 2 million embryos per year are genetically tested. That genetic testing at the moment is fairly simple. It's mainly to detect problems with their chromosome count, something called Down syndrome. But the same biopsy cell sample from each embryo can now predict all the things that I described previously. So we are entering a new age. Unfortunately, it will first be people who can afford it, who have money, who can travel to have this kind of advanced reproduction done. I think gradually the average person will ask their government Why can I not have these advantages if only rich people can have them at the moment? Why can I not have them? And this is the future that we have to think very carefully about. And I'm very grateful to have someone like Jamie out there trying to raise the level of understanding about these technologies, which are so new but are going to have such deep consequences for the human species.
Thank you. Ruben.
Thank you. I'm Ruben Arutunian. I'm from Armenia. I was born in Armenia. I'm academician secretary of National Academy of Sciences, and I'm responsible for activities of 8 academy centers, scientific centers, biological profile, and institutions. At the same time, and my main profession, I am professor of genetics, and I am head of Department of Genetics and Cytology in Yerevan State University. About my scientific interests, I began my postgraduate studies in Moscow in Institute of Medical Genetics, and I'm specialist in molecular cytogenetics and environmental genetics. And I don't divide practically the investigation of human genome from environmental problems and from the investigation of environmental genomics. And so, for example, this year, with participation of my activity, we began the member of IBOL, Barcode of Life initiative. I will speak about it later, where there will be the research planned of genomes of different animals, plants on all the planets, and also in Armenia. So I am delighted to participate in today's discussion and will be glad to answer on your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruben. So let me just add a little bit of color, particularly to what Steve said, and then we're going to break down our conversation in thinking about applications of these technologies to the transformation of healthcare and to the transformation of reproduction. And then we're going to talk about the really important ethical issues and how we can manage those ethical issues in a way that doesn't totally freak everybody out, but allows us to do the good stuff. So implicit in what everybody here has said is something that I want to just explain to the audience a little bit more. Everybody knows that we have 3 billion base pairs in our genomes. We have about 23,000 genes. And in the old days, people used to think there's one gene that does one thing. And like they say, oh, there's a tall gene, a smart gene, a horseback riding gene, or whatever. And now we know that most traits and most disorders and most diseases are genetically complex. Because we are at an early stage in our understanding of the human genome, particularly as it applies to healthcare, the things that we can understand the best now are single gene mutation diseases and disorders. So that means where there's one letter in many cases that is off. And because of that, you have, in many cases, some kind of very terrible and often sometimes deadly genetic disease like sickle cell disease or Tay-Sachs or Huntington's. And in many ways, that's kind of the entry level for the medical application of these technologies. But because we are genetically complex, that means that all of our traits, most of our traits, are influenced. It could be tens, hundreds, or thousands of genes. And those genes are all doing many different things simultaneously, and just that we understand one application doesn't mean that we know what's happening in this great symphony of not just human genetics, but human biology set in the context of the dynamic environment around us. But when it's a single gene mutation that we're responding to, and especially if we know it's a deadly single gene mutation, fixing it is not very morally complex because all you need to do is be better than death. And pretty much most anything is better than death. But when we talk about complex genetics, understanding traits like height that Steve referenced, that is influenced by hundreds, maybe thousands of genes, that introduces a level of complexity that in some ways allows us to do certain things comfortably and certain things less comfortably. And that's why we really need to think about how do we pair our level of understanding with the magnitude of the interventions that we are considering. So I hope that's helpful as a foundation. So let's talk now about the applications of genetic technologies in our transition toward a world of precision healthcare. The title of our topic is When AI Meets Genomics. And so it's not coincidental that we have somebody from IBM, because the complexity of human biology, and certainly of the genome, is so great that if we didn't have incredibly powerful machine learning algorithms and huge amounts of computer power, we would never be able to understand and even begin to access these complex patterns. So this is a very technical subject, but because it's so important to where we are going, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to talk about how you see, in popular terms, this intersection of genetics and big data analytics, and what is possible. I mean, how far do you think that we can go in understanding the complexity of our genome? I say a lot of times that the complexity of human biology has been pretty constant for millions of years. But the sophistication of our tools is on an exponential J-curve. So conceptually, there ought to be a point when the sophistication of our tools meets the complexity of our biology, and then immediately after that exceeds the complexity of our biology. But that's theoretical. There are people who are actually in the trenches. Lakshmi, what do you think? Yeah.
So we have been talking about being cautious about everything. So I will take the cautious note. And biology, like Jamie has been saying, is extremely complex. And ideally, we want to have a mechanistic understanding of everything. That is, we want to say, okay, A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. But that's extremely difficult. So if you take a scientist who wants to have a mechanistic understanding of everything, then we'll have to say, okay, wait for 500 years or so, and by then probably we will understand everything. But now computer science and data comes in, and they start saying that we understand that you won't have a mechanistic understanding, but we will have enough evidence just through data to tell you that A actually leads to E, but we do not know the intermediate B, C, D, and maybe for what we are looking for, it doesn't matter. And we just want to say, okay, you have a mutation A, we don't understand how it affects, say, height, or you have a set of mutations, how it affects the phenotype, and we could go in that direction. So big data with algorithms and so on is statistics, mathematics, and so on. You bring in all the right tools, will actually try to quickly take you there. And to get you all grounded, we are talking about tomorrow, we are talking about the next decade, the next century, and so on. And sometimes we want to also ask, what can I do today? And how can I help people today? And so in that vein, we are applying AI and other techniques to look at, say, treatments that have been given to patients in the past, which treatments have worked, possibly with what genomics connections, and we try to bring in these AI algorithms to suggest treatments for the patients. And this, we are talking about, say, what we can do actually just today. And if I may, I might just digress a little bit into how little we understand of everything. So whenever people get excited about how much we are understanding, and I always feel that the more we know, we realize how little we actually know. And in that context, when we take the genomics and we look at these markers and we look at the SNPs and say what leads to what kind of phenotypes, we did a little experiment, and this was in this case of cancer. And there is so little we understand about cancer. Cancer is a disease that is killing people today, and we know that cancer is a disease of the genome, so which is a good fit for using algorithms with genome and so on. So to cut a long story short, we were trying to see what part of the genome actually is contributing to the disease. And there are parts of the genome that we know a lot about. They are the genes, intergenic regions, and there are regulatory factors and so on. And there are parts of the genes which are completely in the dark. They're called dark matter. It's termed by the community as dark matter. And lo and behold, we found that with algorithms and an information theoretic viewpoint, that the dark matter part of the genome contributed much more signals than to what we know about. So just to say that sometimes we understand so little, we know so little. We are of course worried about the future, but even today, our understanding of how the genome works and how it contributes happens to be low, and we have a lot to learn there.
That's great. In his introductory comments at the beginning of this conference, my friend and former colleague Dick Clark said that we all have our lives that are guided by these algorithms, and so we have an absolute right to know how these algorithms are functioning, how they arrive at a certain conclusion. But Steve, in your work, as I understand it, you are doing these complex analytics, and there is an outcome that is beyond our understanding because the patterns are so complex. And yet we know that they may not be causal, and yet in many cases they perhaps are or could be predictive. And so how do we think about using complex algorithms to understand extremely complex systems, where there are things that we can know and things that we can't know?
Let me make a broad comment first about the problem of complexity and AI. So yesterday I flew here from Paris, and the airline priced my ticket. It gave me a very precise price. Maybe it cost me $468.42 to buy the ticket from Paris to Yerevan round trip. How did they determine that price? Did a human sit down and decide, well, the 92 cents is right, definitely? No. It was processed through an algorithm, and the algorithm took into account many complex factors. Maybe the weather, maybe what had happened last year, maybe fuel prices, maybe projected fuel prices, maybe 50 variables, 100 variables were combined to produce that price, which I paid to get on the airplane. When we predict the height of an individual from their genome, we are using information from 20,000 different genetic variants which are spread throughout your DNA. And there is no human brain that can combine 20,000 different inputs to arrive at an answer. You can't even keep track of 200 inputs, let alone 20,000. The current best breast cancer predictors use 1 to 5,000 genetic variants, again, spread throughout the genome. So humans are entering an age when we have to rely on machines to do calculations which we ourselves cannot fully understand. And we just have to get used to that. Now, how do the airlines know that the algorithms they're using actually generate the maximum profit for selling that seat on that flight? They have to run tests. In the same way, if I come to you and I say, hey, I have a height predictor and the accuracy is within a few centimeters, how can you be sure that that predictor works? What you need to do is take a second population of people called the validation set, maybe 1,000 Armenians, and we look at the genomes of those 1,000 Armenians. You don't give us any information about their height, you just give them their DNA, and we predict the heights, and then you calculate what was the typical error, how far off were we typically in our prediction. These kinds of validation studies have now been done for genetic predictors. And in the case of height, as I said, we know the standard error is about 3 centimeters, a bit less than 3 centimeters. So that is the level of accuracy, and it's been tested for people from different populations on different continents in different parts of the world. Similarly, for breast cancer risk, heart attack risk, we have now validated these predictors in many populations around the world. So even though we don't understand exactly what a particular genetic variant is doing to the biochemistry in your body or the way that your bones grow when you're 12 years old, we don't actually understand that in detail, but we are confident that the predictors actually work. And we are going to enter a phase in medicine where the computer is going to give advice to the doctor which the doctor will not fully understand. And we just have to get used to it. We have to be extremely careful to make sure that all the predictors are validated to be sure that they're actually working and that we're confident that they're working. The same way that the CEO of Air France has to be confident that the algorithms they're using to price their tickets are working.
Ruben. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure that our colleagues will agree that we did not discuss this question with you formally, because it is just the problem that I wish to speak about. First, I want to formulate that maybe the highlights, one of highlights of our Congress is the discussion around the supercomputer. We are supercomputers, and we have to know the programs that we are consisted from. And so in Armenia, from last year, we were planning, so there are 2 persons that made it, Arsen Arakelian and Hari Glorikian from United States, Arsen, director of Molecular Biology Institute. That was the project of Armenian genome. And that project is conditionally approved. Now it is discussed. We wait also specialists from Illumina. And so the idea is that you have to know, when you spoke about 1,000 Armenians, yes, we have to know genomes of 1,000 to 3,000 Armenians. Then we have to go to exomes. Then for some groups there can be the chips, for some some diseases hereditary, and altogether has to be analyzed, because every nation has its features, its problems, for example. I'll bring you such example. I think it's bright example. When they analyze the woman for breast cancer 1, BRCA1, BRCA2, in Armenia, we have so many false negative results. Why? And when the Institute had analyzed the group in Czechia, they found that in European women, mutations are absolutely different from the mutations in Armenian women. And so you have to take different primers. That is, I think, the direct question, how we have to know first our genomes to do some diagnostics, later. And another thing that I want to mention, that we have very serious environmental problems in Armenia. When a few years ago I had written a book in French, it was Les Secrets de Santé Arménienne. I wish to say how nice we are, how good is our heredity. But last year, when I revived this book for the Forum of Francophonia, I had to change the name. I had to write Les Mystères de Santé Arménienne, because we have really now even more problems with cancer, etc. So we have to know our basic to look for the diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. And Ruben raises a critically important point. Steve's work is primarily based on the best genotypic and phenotypic data set in the world, which is the UK Biobank. But in order, as I talked about in my introductory remarks, because we want to zero in on each of us. We want to understand everybody's biology as much as possible. We are all part of multiple groups. And so we will need much bigger and much more diverse and much more representative data sets in order to make sure that everybody is able to benefit maximally based on genetic information that is understood in the context of who they are. And this is going to happen on its own because the cost of genome sequencing is trending toward zero and because of the transition to precision medicine and health that I've described. But the faster it happens, the better it is. That's why in the United States, we have a genome sequencing and building a genetic data set program, and it's called All of Us because the goal is that it needs to be representative. And so having a country like Armenia with its unique heritage, it's really, really important that we build these kinds of data sets that are representative. So let's just assume that we've done that. Assume that it's absolutely right that we're going to have increasing but never perfect powers of prediction. So this is all about sometimes maybe when there's a single gene mutation disease, it can be like binary, yes, no. But when we're talking about something with hundreds or thousands of variants, it's probabilistic. It's not deterministic. And yet we're going to have all of this information, and we're going to have it at birth, and we're going to then transition to predictive health. So I'd like to ask each of you quickly, because we're going to speed it up a little bit, how far do you think, based on this intersection of AI and genomics, how far within the next few years do you think we can travel toward this coming world of predictive health, predictive actionable health?
Okay. I am the cautious one, so I am going to say very little. Simply because, let me give you my rationale for that. You know, I have been working on genomics, and I believe that there is a lot in the DNA, and I would like to associate phenotype with directly DNA markers and so on. But there are a lot of other external factors that come in, and we have not yet fully understood environment and even epigenetics. Epigenetics are markers, kind of markers sitting on top of your DNA. And in fact, sometimes when we say genomics, we are trying to take all of these markers into account, but maybe perhaps not. And so I think that this will take a longer time than next few decades, because I think our understanding is still low. There are other external factors that can come in, and just like validations that Steve was mentioning, there has to be a lot more validations that way, and the population genomics effect. So the population genomics is different, populations are different. So I'm going to be little pessimistic, I'm afraid, on that front, and say that it'll take probably much longer than we are excited about.
Steve, I imagine a different view.
I'll take the other side of that view. So I think that people who have been in the field for a long time have been conditioned in an environment where the amount of data available was insufficient, and we've recently crossed a threshold where much more data is available, and consequently much more dramatic progress is happening quite quickly. In the United Kingdom, which has one of the most prominent national healthcare systems in the world, they are planning a 1 million and then 5 million person pilot in which they're not just doing genetics research, they will actually use the risk scores, the genetic risk scores for each of those individuals to inform the GP, the general practitioner, about certain risks that that person has. There are now about 20 different common disease conditions for which we have validated risk predictors, so that if you take the people who have the top 1% risk score, for example, for coronary artery disease or heart attack, they will have maybe 10 times the risk. This has been validated now in multiple populations. They will have 10 times the risk of the average person. And so if you're a doctor and you can inexpensively know which 1% of your patients is in that high risk category, it would actually be unethical of you not to try to use that information to help that patient. And the UK has already started planning to do this at the multi-million person scale. The genotyping necessary to measure your genome sufficiently to build these predictors costs only about $30 per individual. So compared to standard medical tests, just getting your cholesterol level measured, getting an inexpensive genotype from which we can compute these risk scores is inexpensive. And so you will see increasingly health systems around the world starting to roll out population level genetic risk calculation. And the British are leading the way, but there are other countries, even Estonia, for example, has already started pilot projects where they're validating these predictors in their population.
Yeah, and that's really important. Let me paint this picture for you, because I think many of us have had our genome sequenced. And then you go to your doctor and you say, hey, I have my whole genome sequenced. I have the raw data on a disk or whatever. And the doctor looks at you not just with a lack of comprehension, with absolute terror. Because the doctor, 99.9% of doctors know next to nothing about genetics. So think like, what am I going to do? Or you say, well, no, I have this increased risk of this or that. And doctors don't know what to do with it. They're not trained for that. But just to paint a picture for you of what Steve's talking about looks like. All right, here's how it looks. You're born. You take either a mouth swab or this blood sample from a heel prick. It goes to be sequenced. The cost of sequencing is now whole genome sequence, and Steve is just talking about genotyping, which is much cheaper, but whole genome sequencing is only US, only $600. Moving towards zero. Those analytics are done. A report is prepared, and all it says is whether it's 20 disease risks, or maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be 50, maybe it'll be 100, and on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your risk for getting that disease? And so you know that your kid that you are taking home from the hospital has an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And you know that from just after when this kid was born. Are you going to enroll this kid in sports programs? Are you going to train this kid to have a healthy diet, to be mindful? Of course you are, because you have that information. Are you going to say, no, how dare you give me this information because it's not deterministic? It's not saying I'm going to have this, it's saying I have an increased risk. Like, would you say that if it was your daughter and your daughter had a 20 times greater than average chance of getting breast cancer? Would you say, no, I don't want the information? Or would you say, I demand that information because normally women get screened for breast cancer at around 40, but if my daughter has a 20% greater than average chance of developing breast cancer, we should test her when she's 15 or 20 to get ahead of that curve. So when we think about this stuff in abstract, it all seems really scary. And there are parts of it that are scary, but there are parts of it that are going to save our lives, they're going to save our kids' lives, and that seems to me something that we should be excited about. Ruben, some quick thoughts on this.
Thank you. So I am glad that Steve that works with the predictors, that is producing practically predictor, that is one of fathers of that direction. He said about two moments about the research of whole populations and predictors. They are correlating with each other. I want to say that approximately 50 countries now are doing the research of their human genomes in those countries. And the first years are paying the governments. They give, depending from country, you gave very good example of Estonia. That really Estonia population is as big as Armenian, if not less. And so the same in Estonia, they put the money, and after some moment, already the pharmacological firms became interested in the population, because there is the third point. There is the point of pharmacology. You have, because they cannot work without molecular diagnostics. And when we speak about personalized medicine, for example, I read somewhere that personalized medicine is the commercial variant of the molecular diagnostics practically. So all 3 points are combined, and I think they have naturally to be developed all together. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Yes. So these are the healthcare applications, and as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, beyond that will be the applications in assisted reproduction. So right now, as I mentioned, people around the world, including Armenia, have kids using in vitro fertilization, where the eggs are extracted from the mother and then fertilized in the lab and then re-implanted in the mother. In some places, there is a process called pre-implantation genetic testing, where at around day 5, a few cells are extracted from these early stage embryos and sequenced. And that is what is currently used to determine which of the, let's call it 10 embryos will be implanted in the mother, ideally to be taken to term. But all of these things that we're talking about, this ability to understand genomic prediction will apply at the pre-implanted embryo level. And I'm going to go straight to Steve, and we won't go to everybody for each question for the remainder of our time. But Steve, how do you see the genomic prediction work that you are doing and thinking about revolutionizing this process of IVF and embryo selection, and where might that lead us in 10 or 20 years?
So, just to reiterate, a significant fraction of all children born today are born through IVF. In advanced countries, the leading country in this case is Denmark, at approaching 10% of all babies born are born through IVF. In other developed countries, the percentage is somewhere between 3 and 6%. So if you see a class of kindergartners walking down the street, several of them probably came from IVF. And the parents who are going through that process obviously care very much that they solve the embryo choice problem in the best way. The embryo choice problem is that in a typical situation, a family will have many more embryos to choose from than they actually intend to implant. So you have to make a decision. And the technologies for making that decision are getting better and better. And here we are talking about specifically the genetic capabilities, which is that I can inexpensively obtain the genotype of each embryo with the same accuracy that we can get in the laboratory for an adult. And that means all the predictions that we've been talking about can be made for that embryo already. If you survey parents in different countries and you ask, what do you want to know? What is ethical for you to know about the child in order to make the decision? Almost everybody agrees that health risks are ethical, that it is okay to not choose a particular embryo if you know it's going to have some health problems. Down syndrome, I already mentioned, is heavily selected against in all of these settings. In many countries, in the United States, it's maybe about 60% of parents say selecting for intelligence is okay. In Asia, Jamie mentioned Korea, China, countries like that, probably 85–90% of parents think it is okay to select for intelligence among the embryos. So I think one can clearly predict that the technology here is advancing rapidly, the market demand is already there, and the ethical stance of individuals around the world, although not uniform, are such that you are going to see very big divergences in what is being done in different countries. And I think the future is going to be extremely interesting. Yes,
it's going to be extremely interesting, and it's going to be challenging. I mean, what we're talking about, they all deserve it. What we're talking about is very serious. I mean, we are talking about the future of human life. And it should be ethically challenging. It should make us a little uncomfortable. It should make us a little excited. These are all the normal feelings. And we're going to need to have a process, a political process, a dialogue process, an engagement process, an empowerment process, so that we can all be part of figuring out how these technologies that are going to change our lives and our world can and should be best applied. And we have some examples for how not to do this. And an analogous example is genetically modified crops, GMOs. In 1975, in the early years of what was then called the recombinant DNA revolution, which later became more popularly known as GM, the scientists, the leading scientists, met at a conference center in California called Asilomar, and they had a conference where they said these technologies are really powerful, they can change life in fundamental ways. We need to develop standards and safeguards to make sure that they are used responsibly. And those standards and safeguards have almost entirely been upheld by the extremely responsible application of genetic technologies. And that's why today, after more than 40 years of research, there has never been a single study that has ever shown that consuming genetically modified crops is less healthy for humans than consuming non-GMO crops. And yet, millions of people die in South Asia and Africa because largely Europeans are so afraid of genetically modified crops that they have bans on the import of GM crops. And for these extremely poor countries who all they have to export are agricultural products, they can't do GM because they will lose their main export market. And I'm not saying there aren't problems with GM. Certainly, we don't want to have any one company controlling our food supply. Certainly, we need to maintain the diversity of our biological and our ecosystems. But we are now entering the era of genetically modified humans. And the error of the scientists in 1975 wasn't that they didn't come together to establish principles. They did. The error was they didn't engage the broad general public, and the public wasn't ready for it because the public didn't understand the issues, didn't have a science background, was distracted, focusing on other things. But that doesn't matter, because if we enter the era of human genetic modification, and it's even the most well-intentioned experts who are making the decisions for everybody, everybody else is going to march on the experts with torches and pitchforks. So we have this brief window of time where we, all of us, need to be part of an outreach, education, empowerment, dialogue process that can bring everybody together, not perfectly, but at least in some way so that we can make these big decisions together. So my question for you, Lakshmi, as somebody, I know this is going to scare you because this is out of your comfort zone, but I'm going to do it anyway. So you're at the level of the hard science. And yet, when you have anything, when Watson beats the Jeopardy champ, people in the public say, well, what does this mean? If Watson is beating the Jeopardy, which is a TV game show in the United States, if Watson beats the Jeopardy champ, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my job? What does it mean for my future? So how are as a company like IBM thinking about, well, we're investing in these powerful technologies, what is our responsibility to invest in public education and dialogue so that these technologies can empower people rather than frighten them too much?
Yeah. So, I think Watson beating Jeopardy, it was around the time that AI came out of its winter. And now I think everybody talks about AI. Everybody on the street knows about AI and what AI is. So I think it was wonderful for AI and for humankind to recognize how AI can help you in different ways. And like we have been talking about AI, so now there is, people are looking into what is trustworthy AI, what is fairness in AI. So these have become new research topics, and people are pursuing this to make sure that AI is fair. For example, Steve gave a great example of the ticketing that was done, okay? And you know, the ticketing hopefully did not discriminate Steve based on his genes, let's say, or, you know, based on
My body weight.
body weight, diversity, or whatever. So
I use more fuel.
So the fairness in AI is now, because AI is being used in recruiting and so on. So these different areas of research are coming up, which is trustworthy, fairness, and also to come out of this black box, explainability. So usually AI is associated with it, gives you a black box explanation. Just like in genetics, we said, these are the markers that are there. So you want to get under the covers, and the technology is actually trying to explore this, and you want to explain it, you want to interpret it, and so there are different areas of AI that one is looking into now, so that a common person actually trusts it, believes that it is fair, that you are not discriminated against based on your color, your race, or anything, and also, you know, you're able to interpret what is coming in. So these are areas of research that IBM and others are looking into.
Yeah, and then so if that's the case with AI, which is probably more understandable for people than the complexity of their own biology, how are we going to think about biology when I actually personally am in agreement with Steve that we're going to have predictions that we can't, the answer of why do you think that I have a 40% greater than average chance of developing early onset familial Alzheimer's? I don't want to put words in your mouth, Steve, but the answer will be because the AI algorithm looking at 10 million sets of genotypic and phenotypic information in a massive data pool came to that conclusion. But if you wanted me to go through it bit by bit, I could not, and maybe could never, fully explain how that outcome was reached. So I can't see Steve behind me. Maybe he's shaking his head in one way or the other. But if you have that information, and let's say it's right, and Steve explained, well, you know it's right because you've tested it on other data sets, and eventually the data sets will be big enough so that these predictions will be extremely reliable. And that doesn't mean you're predicting, most of our complex traits aren't entirely genetic. So that means you're not predicting the entire trait, you're predicting a component of the genetic element of that trait. But we're not going to be able to completely explain. So how do we bridge this gap between having actionable insights that we can't fully explain, wanting to act on those insights, and needing to educate the public in just a new way of thinking about being that avoids these extremes of genetic determinism and basically lying to ourselves about the extent of environmental influences and free will. Steve, what do you think?
I think explainability of AI is extremely important, and it's an aspirational goal. We would like to get there, but let me just give you some examples which suggest that we won't fully get there. How many of you use your microwave oven regularly? Okay. How many of you could explain to a high school, college class how your microwave oven works? Okay. How many think you could explain to a junior level, a college level physics class how your microwave oven works? Okay. Now, that's a device you use every day, and your cell phone is actually using microwaves. It has a microwave antenna to communicate with the base station. Is that damaging your brain? It cooks your food. Why doesn't it damage your brain? How do you know it doesn't damage your brain? Much of the technology that we use is not understood by the average person. Eventually, we just get used to it. And unfortunately, that is my prediction, not my suggestion, but it's my prediction for where we're going to end up in genomics. Now, if everybody's had the experience where you're booking a plane ticket and you realize, oh, if I come back Sunday, it's much more expensive than if I come back Monday. And you could go to the airline and say, how come you're charging me so much more to come back on Sunday? Now, they can give you a kind of directional answer. They can say, well, there are more business travelers that are trying to move on Sunday, and so we found out we can just charge more on Sunday, and that's why we're charging you more on Sunday. So you can get a little directional answer from them for why it's more expensive, but why is it exactly $268 more expensive? That only the machine knows, okay? Now, genetics is even harder because I might have to look at 20,000 different genetic variants spread throughout your DNA to figure out what your height is going to be, and each of them has only a tiny effect. So there isn't even this big directional story that I can tell the way I could with the airline price. So that is the direction that we're heading in, and I think the only thing we can do as scientists is try to be as transparent as possible in our methods and the validation tests that we do on the predictors so that we satisfy ourselves that they're working properly, we convince the medical community that they're working well, and then the general population will believe that they're working well. But detailed understanding could be beyond the grasp of most people.
Ruben, thank you. Ruben, how can we best engage and educate the general public on issues of complex science in ways that the public can not just be informed, but empowered to be part of the decision-making process about how these technologies will be used?
Yes, thank you. I will speak about two problems that were here discussed. First, when we spoke about children from in vitro practically from extracorporeal insemination, I think that, and about GMO, and it is the relation of public to those problems. What is going on? Really, in Armenia, we have more than 1,000 children born by these techniques, but we have some discussion with the church, because in every country, the church has its relation to those it permits, but it is not enthusiastic. And about genetically modified organisms. Armenia is part of Eurasian economic unit, and in Russia, genetically modified organisms from 16 is prohibited. Last year, we had here also in the second reading in Parliament it was discussed, the law about genetic modified organisms, also limitation. Already we have 0.9%, etc., etc. And what I want to say, that I think that every country has to make its own decisions, and it is determined by the interest of the country. We get, for example, products with GMO, production of GMO every moment, beginning from chocolate, candies, etc., etc. But at the same time, I am sure these days you have tasted Armenian tomatoes, Armenian grapes, etc., etc. And I'm not sure that you will be glad if you'll know, or anyone will buy from us those tomato juice, etc., if they'll know that it is genetically modified organism. So there are two problems. One, that we have population, billions of people that we have to save their lives, and there's 148 Nobel Prize laureates had written about it. And at the same time, we will be glad to remain one of the reservation where we will have agriculture without genetically modified organisms. Thank you.
I think it's a very valid point that every country has a decision with crops. If they want to ban genetic modification, genetically modified crops, they can. But we can't pretend that all of our choices, including those choices, don't have consequences. So let's just say, for example, that you are the agriculture minister or the prime minister of a small landlocked country somewhere in Africa and South Asia. And you have small farms around the country that are what keep people alive. The soil is depleted because of the nature of agriculture and the lack of inputs and the weak infrastructure. And the climate is changing, and so the crops that you have traditionally grown in your area can maybe no longer be grown there. Or maybe there were pests that couldn't live at your latitude, but now because of climate change, they are able to extend their range. And then you have a choice. And the choice is, do you want to stick to your guns because you are against genetic modification in principle? And even though there's a consequence is that people may die or leave your country, do you want to build a full infrastructure, because most of these problems could actually be solved if you had roads and electricity and information systems and crop rotation and educated farmers? I mean, there are certainly models of feeding the world without GM, but you're not going to do it in your little country in sub-Saharan Africa in a year or 2 years. Or do you use genetically modified crops that have been slightly tweaked to survive in the new environment in which you live? In the old days, when these kinds of changes happen, we would just have these famines and lots of people would die or areas would be wiped out, and now, for a good reason, we don't want that. And the same is true for human genetic engineering, which is coming. I'm not saying everyone should be for it or against it or somewhere in between, but I am absolutely saying that the choices we make will have consequences. If you opt into something or opt out of something, it won't be free. There will be a consequence. Maybe it will be a good consequence. Maybe it will be a bad consequence, but there will be a consequence. And that's why we really need to, in my view, be really thoughtful about these. That doesn't mean one outcome is better than the other, one view is better than the other, but we can't pretend that our choices don't have major consequences. And this is our last question because we're running out of time. But this is a conversation about science, but at its core, what we're really talking about is ethics. Because we collectively are going to have to figure out, how do we apply these technologies in ways that don't just enhance our biology, but enhance our humanity, make us better people, friends, members of communities, support our social cohesion rather than dividing us. So maybe I'll give the last opportunity for each of you in turn, however you formulate it. How do you, when you think about the intersection of ethics and these revolutionary areas of science that we're discussing, how do you think about it?
That's an excellent question. Because if we look at history, if you just go back 100 years, we know what we did with genes, eugenics, and so on. So we have to be cognizant that things can go really, really wrong. And so I think it's people like you, Jamie, and others, external to the scientific community, because every scientist, I think, believes they're doing the right thing and so on. So we do need people externally coming in and deciding what is ethical and what is not ethical, which I think is happening. And there are IRBs now, otherwise you could do research on humans anywhere and so on. And you have the GDPR in Europe and so on. And I think externally, the public and external communities should come in and help the scientists. I think scientists are always want to do the right thing, and sometimes unintentionally they may not. So it is the external community and the public. The public should participate in this process and help the scientists do the right thing in the long term.
Steve.
Scientists and technologists develop tools for society, but society itself has to decide how to use those tools. And the only way that in a democratic society we can make those decisions is for average people to become as informed as possible about the realities and then to express their opinions at the ballot box. So that is what I think has to happen. Now, I anticipate that different countries may come to different conclusions, and so what is allowed or not allowed as far as genetic editing or genetic screening in different countries, I think it will vary from country to country. I want to give one historic example, which I happen to know about personally. I know some of the early IVF pioneers. I remember that when the first test tube baby was born, I was just a kid. I was having breakfast with my mom and dad, and the TV was on in the background, and they said something about first test tube baby born. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember, that seemed like crazy science fiction back then. And the first test tube baby is now in her early 40s. Okay? Now, if you look back at the media coverage of test tube babies or IVF babies 40 years ago, you will find that the scientists who made these breakthroughs were called monsters by many people. They were called Dr. Frankenstein by many people. Now, get on a plane and fly to Copenhagen and go to a preschool and look at the beautiful children that are playing in that preschool. And tell yourselves that if those scientists had not made those breakthroughs, 10% of those children would not exist. And now you tell them they're monsters and Frankensteins. And some of those scientists are still alive and have lived through what I just described to you. So we are passing through another revolution, this genetic revolution, an AI revolution, which I think will even be much more impactful than test tube babies. And so I think you should think carefully about how you want to treat the pioneers in those scientific areas as well.
Ruben.
I want to bring the analogies with nuclear power, practically. And so I think that ethical is everything that helps to the progress of individual and society. And that progress can be correlated only in democratic societies. So that is my point of view. That's all. Thank you.
I think it's a great point, and maybe we'll end where we began, which is this is all about you. If you are only feeling excited about these technologies, you're missing something. If you're only feeling afraid about these technologies, you're also missing some things. The only right response to everything we are discussing is that these are incredibly powerful technologies. They are coming soon. They have a tremendous potential to do wonderful things, because every time a little kid dies of a terrible genetic disease, that is a crime against human potential. And every time a 90-year-old person gets dementia, and we've lost 90 years of investment of the love and care and wisdom that this person has accrued, that is a crime against human potential. What if we could get 10 more years of healthy human life? How much better off would we all be? And the answer is a lot. But every one of these technologies, like all technologies, have the potential to be abused. And the difference between the good scenario and the bad scenario is us, which is why everybody needs to be engaged. Everybody needs to be empowered. I'm trying to do my little bit. I met with someone from your Ministry of Culture, and I'm trying to get my book that came out this year, Hacking Darwin, on this subject, translated into Armenian. So if you see people from the government, please encourage them. And I'm going to be coming back next year for the FAST forum. And so I hope that we can have a nationwide conversation in Armenian language on these topics then, because really what we're talking about isn't the future of science. It's the future of all of us, and we have to be part of it so we can walk forward together. So join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, Jamie. I have a question for you
Uh-oh.
before we go off.
Yes.
Now,
This is like the voice. Have you been on stage before? Is this like
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was yesterday.
Okay.
Now listen, does anyone know the actor Jason Statham? How many people think he looks like Jason Statham? Hands up.
I don't even, who is he?
He's an action actor.
Action star.
Okay, so maybe okay. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that important contribution.
Jump off the stage. The lightning rounds are about to start, so don't leave. There's no break or anything. We're just sorting things out together. A round of applause for the panel and for Jason Statham, aka Mark. Thank you. Please don't move.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well done.
Oh, Jason Statham.
I don't even know who that is.
You don't know? That's my favorite star.
Oh,
action
good.
Star.
What's he been in?
He's been in a lot of action movies.
Oh, that's good. I really.
they'll have about 3 minutes to do their pitch, and then we'll have 3 minutes for Q&A from our judges. There will be no questions from the audience. And then judges are going to have a score sheet, and they will determine who are the winners. And yes, we're going to have winners. The first prize will be $25,000, and the second prize will be $10,000. And over the 3 sessions, there's over $100,000 that will be given to the winners. And by the way, I hope I see you at the closing, because we will announce the winners then. Yes, so it's very exciting to start. And it looks like the props are ready as well. But before we go there, I'd like to introduce the judges. I have to put my glasses on, I'm sorry. All right, so for the judges, we have Jovanes Avoyan, founder of Pixart. Jenny Bofinger Schuster, VP of Sustainability and Cities, Siemens. Bob Griffin, Managing Partner, DBI Equity Partners. Yulili Anobakpuri, Partner of Caper Capital. Catherine Serafian, Senior Vice President, Pixar Animation Studios. And Neil Bansal, Managing Director, Head of Transformation, BNP Paribas. I meant it when I said we have distinguished judges here. So with that, why don't we get started? Monty, introduce the first speaker.
Thank you, Carolina. The first speaker is Karan Hachikian, the CEO and co-founder of Expert Technologies.
Hi everyone, my name is Karan. I'm the CEO of Expert Technologies. Medical treatment is a very challenging process for children. Children are scared as they are far from their homes and forced to be in a stressful and uncomfortable environment. There are more than 10,000 pediatric hospitals in the United States. Over 10 million children yearly visit hospitals for different kinds of treatments and procedures. Stress and anxiety extend the procedure's time. In 10% of cases, doctors have to use sleeping pills to be able to perform procedures. That is why social and emotional support is critical for children during the treatments, as the procedures can be not only scary, but also very painful. And we have a solution. Let me introduce Robin. Robin is a friendly companion robot with the sole purpose to make children happy and support them during medical treatments. Robin engages children in playful and meaningful interactions by telling funny stories, joking, and playing interactive games with them. By using our patent-pending technology, Robin intelligently adapts his emotions based on interaction with children, making them natural and human-like while connecting with children on the emotional level. By this, Robin distracts children from pain and helps them to overcome stress and anxiety. And thing about robots is that kids love them. And here you can see how children react to Robin. So far, we made an MVP of Robin. Our business model based on monthly subscription fee, and we already have 3,000 monthly recurring revenue. We're closing our pre-seed round led by SmartGate DC. And this month, we are starting 2 pilots with the biggest pediatric hospitals in Armenia. Our team is coming from world-leading companies such as Synopsys, VMware, and National Instruments, having strong expertise in hardware design, machine learning, and robotics. Also, our team consists of top psychologists and therapists having over 10 years of experience in the domain. We're expert technologists. Thank you very much.
Questions from the judges?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. That was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had two questions for you. One was on the cost for Robin. How much is the cost? And then also, if you could speak a little bit about the patent. You said it was patent protected. If you describe what that is and how difficult it might be for someone to replicate.
So subscription fee is monthly $1,500 USD. And what about patent? We already filed a patent, and it is patent pending in US. And it works in this way that we collecting data on emotional recognition. We are recognizing the tone of voice of the person. We are recognizing emotions. And we are also considering other environmental parameters. And all these are inputs of our technology, which helps to be adjust and have adaptive behavior with children. So during interaction, Robin can change its emotions to be able to increase their happiness and help to overcome stress. So this is it.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Here we go. Congratulations on your progress to date. So talk to me about scalability. How long does it take for you to build a Robin? How many do you have in inventory? What's your expectation from a scale perspective?
So actually, right now, as we already developed the MVP, so we can build a robot in a month, one robot. So we are right now 5 full-time people, so that's why. But we can increase our team and start building faster.
Hi. Can you tell me a little bit about the hygiene and sanitation of the robot? Because some medical procedures, you have bodily fluids. And then secondly, in terms of, have you done any clinical trials around the efficacy of the device to distract children during procedures?
Yeah. So we are targeted, and we are starting from post-surgery kids because they are most sensitive to the stress, and especially after cardio surgeries. So we are starting from that niche. And we already, right now, we are in process of developing the exact content for Robin during the interaction with children. And this month we are starting the pilots. So we are in the process of developing, yeah. So
hygiene of the robot?
So
cleanliness.
So yeah,
sterile.
so the good thing about Robin that it is made of plastic, and it is very easily can be sterilized. Yeah. So this is why we build it from plastic. So it don't gather the dirtiness. Yeah.
Maybe last quick question.
Thank you. This is great. I know some hospitals use therapy animals or soft plush or therapists. Who do you consider your competitors, and how will Robin deal with small space procedures like MRI machine where the child cannot see it or even hear it well?
Yes, the hospitals are doing that kind of events like animals. But the problem with them that they are rare. But to help children to overcome stress, they need consistent emotional help and support. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Let's thank Gary.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Monty, we need the next speaker.
Our second presenter is David Bagdasarian. He's the CEO and co-founder of CRISP.
Hello, Stacy.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for taking the time to meet with me today.
No problem. I'm calling from the road.
You're lucky. I'm working from home right now.
Today's workforce is on the move. The office can be anywhere, and it often is. But that means the working environment can be unpredictable and loud. CRISP acts as an intelligent audio filter between your hardware and your conferencing app to give you control over background noise on both sides of a conference call. The application is compatible with any microphone, any speaker, and any conferencing application. CRISP has harnessed the power of the Gaussian neural accelerator built into Intel 10th generation Ice Lake CPUs to create a deep neural network capable of isolating and removing unwanted sounds instantly. Better, more productive conferencing is just a download away, leveraging the potential of machine learning to solve real-world problems. That is the future of AI, powered by Intel.
Thank you, Intel, for making this awesome video about CRISP. Hi, I'm David. I'm the CEO and co-founder at CRISP. At CRISP, our mission is to enable professionals to work from anywhere. We believe that remote work is the single most impactful event that decentralizes the cities, the commute, and the availability of talent. We also believe that AI-powered voice and video technologies are going to dramatically improve how professionals work remotely and still stay highly professional. Remote workers face two problems today, two real-life problems when they join calls: background noise and background video privacy. We have solved the first one for our users, and we are about to solve the second one as well. We launched CRISP 4 months ago, and it comes in 3 plans: Free, Pro, and Teams. In a short span of time, we have all these companies, individuals and teams from all these companies registered and using CRISP. And this is just a fraction of the companies. There are 6,000 more SMBs that have registered for CRISP today. And CRISP is having a good traction on enterprise as well. There are large enterprises that are deploying CRISP into their tens of thousands of employees and call center agents as we speak. We think the opportunity is enormous. There are 100 million plus professionals that work from open office, public workplaces, and home. And this number is growing with remote work. We have founded the company exactly 2 years ago. We raised 3.5 million so far, and we have offices in Yerevan and Berkeley. Thank you.
Yes, let's start with the questions from the judges.
And we have this gift for everyone.
Thank
if you
you.
download CRISP.
Will do. So thank you much for this very compelling presentation. I try to give 2 questions. One is, I'm traveling a lot, so I'm your user. I would say connectivity is another big issue. So how does that relate, and how many of my problems are really connectivity related and background noise related? And the second, I kind of not yet fully understand the, let's say, distribution model. So I download it, is it then on my device, or how does it work?
Yeah, let me first start with the second question. The CRISP is available on Mac and Windows currently. You can just download and install. It works with Zoom, Skype, with 800 different apps, and with any headset and microphone you have. CRISP for iPhone is going to be launched pretty soon, in a month. So the second question, connectivity is a big problem. We tried solving that with research and AI, but then abandoned that project. So we are fully focused on noise cancellation, video background privacy, and echo.
Clarification question on your traction. You said 600 people and companies. So are you going B2B or B2C? And like in total, like how many companies versus individual users have used the device or are paying for the device?
Yeah, so actually that number was 6,000. 6,000 plus SMBs have signed up. Our go-to-market is all bottom-up. So we are going to the consumer with the hope that they will go and, when they start using it, they will push to their companies, and companies will come and buy CRISP teams. And that's what we are observing. Companies such as Zapier, GitLab, Pivotal have already onboarded with this approach. And we have over 20, I believe we are only 20 teams now, paying teams onboarded, and over 200 teams which have more than 3 employees. But they're free. As far as individuals, we have 6,500 individuals that already paid for CRISP.
When you say you're about to solve privacy, can you say more what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called video background privacy. So imagine, like, the experience we want to provide. Imagine you're in Starbucks, you join over Zoom with your team over video, and they think you're in the office. So we'll replace the background with your headquarter image, and that's a full privacy for you.
Okay, so I think we're done with the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Monty, next speaker,
Thank you,
please.
Carolina. Our next presenter will be Arman Danilian. He's the CEO and co-founder of Local Express, and he will be later joined by his colleague Bharat Safaran for questions. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Arman and I'm here to present Local Express.
What if I tell you that technology has affected most of the areas of our lives? Missing the major one, grocery shopping. Nothing big happened in grocery world after inventing supermarket format about 50 years ago. Till now. Meet Trader Jack. He wants to offer online shopping for his customers. He thinks it is too expensive and too hard. He needs developers, designers, quality assurance, database managers, marketing specialists, drivers, and more. But then, Jack found Local Express. With Local Express, he got complete e-commerce solution, fully integrated with his stores in a matter of days and for an affordable price. Connecting physical and digital experience opened new doors for Jack. Jack's customers now enjoy with both physical and digital experience in the stores and online. For some of Jack's customers, it means saving precious time. For some, it's convenience. For some, it's access to all savings. For others, it helps maintain healthy lifestyle with nutrition's data. All those benefits help Jack to bring new customers and build more loyal relationship with customers. Great changes come along with Local Express.
Thank you. So, who is Jack? He's one of the 100,000 independent store owners in US who is lacking access to e-commerce solutions. Why does it matter? Because he's losing the battle to Amazon and Walmart for 840 billion market, 20% of which will be online by 2022. That's why we created Local Express. We are LA-based startup, and we are the only omni-channel white label self-service turnkey solution for the grocers of any size. How it works, we connect to the POS machine of the stores and immediately digitalize all of this inventory of the store by matching to our product database of 1 million products. Also, we provide out of the box over 100 delivery services for the stores to use. In the same time, we identified that small to medium-sized store owners, they have lack of the marketing experience in digital, and that's why we created App Store with many marketing automation solutions in it. Traction, we have about 28 retailers with 52 stores across 5 states right now. We are a team of 3 co-founders. I have experience in 8 years of experience running e-commerce companies with 200+ million revenue. And also I have a Bharat, who is our CEO, who has experience in operations and finances. We're also backed by industry leaders. They are veterans in grocery, and they provide us valuable insights in the grocery and open doors for us. Yes, we have a team in Armenia, and we are planning to open the office in Armenia soon. Thank you so much.
Right, question time.
Hi, good presentation. I was curious more on the financials. If you could just give a little bit more about how exactly you make money and what your projections are in terms of revenue and potential.
So the current normalized ARR is about 200,000. Our financial model based on subscription, and we also charge per transaction fee. We have 3 packages for do-it-yourself platform. We also have an enterprise solution, but it's based on the personal needs of the grocers. So enterprise solution is more suitable for a large corporation with like a tenth of hundreds of stores.
So, first of all, congratulations on the work that you've done to date. How are you really seriously going to compete with the Amazons of the world and Walmarts of the world that are just flooding this market? Independents right now are getting squeezed every day. Their margins are eroding, significantly. It's a tough market to compete in. How are you going to do that?
Well, we are helping the independents to compete actually by providing all the instruments that need to be a successful online player. So we make their customers' experience as flawless as somebody shopping at Amazon, but that's our goal. And probably nobody wants to see their favorite, bakeries or around the corner grocers to go out of the business because of these giants, right?
And yet, to add to that, we are Shopify for groceries, basically. We provide all the tools, and you saw the delivery infrastructure is just humongous.
I think this is great, and I like the way you're trying to include the small businesses and get them a seat at the table. I'm surprised not to see any women on your team at all. How do you build a diversity of perspectives in your decision making?
Well, we do have women in our team, and we definitely will have more women in our team on the board. Actually, we're composing the board of directors, so we'll make sure there are women.
And actually, our development team is run by the woman.
Yes, that's a good answer.
Okay, I think we're done. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Monty, next speaker, please.
Our penultimate presenter is Albert Hofhan-Itian, the co-founder and director of hardware development at Soraya Tech.
Good afternoon. I'm Albert, the co-founder and CEO of Soraya Tech. We all use electricity every day, but not all of us know that electricity companies have a huge problem, which are the electricity losses on the way to our homes. Good news are that the majority of these losses are preventable. Just like a glass of beer, electricity has 2 components. One which we can use and one which is useful, just like a foam. However, we have to pay for the whole glass. It's typically from 7 to 20% of losses. For example, 90 million euro in Armenia and €500 million in Norway just turns into a heat every year and creating a lot of CO2 emissions. Available solutions to detect and prevent the losses by over 20% are expensive and very bulky. Our solution is a smart metering device that enables advanced, sustainable, digital, and very accurate measurements, as well as reduction of losses by over 50%. We are now focusing on EU market because of policy regulations which push electricity companies to digitalize their network. Total size of a smart grid market in Europe is 60 billion, which is very attractive for us, and we have already partnered with one of the biggest electricity networks in Norway. By removing the most expensive and bulky part of traditional equipment, our solution is cheaper, easier to install, and provide more accurate measurements without any maintenance required. Our business model consists of one-off sales for the hardware and subscription model for the software. We started from proof of concept in Armenia then pilot installation in Norway with Skagerrak Net, one of the Norway's biggest grid operators, who become one of 3 confirmed pilot partners of us. We also have an international patent pending. We have a great team of experts, expertised in technology development, R&D, software and business. Our vision is to minimize the beer foam in electricity network. Help us to reduce your electricity bill. Thank you very much for your attention.
Questions?
Okay, so I try. Okay, so that's a tricky solution here. Okay, so I understand that the e-meter is primarily measuring. Can you elaborate a little bit where the savings in energy are then resulting from?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. We managed to put measurements and electronics on the primary side. It means on medium voltage. So we are avoiding all losses of measurement and incorrections. So we are not estimating, we provide real measurements and data which can allow you, using your own assets, to minimize your losses.
Sorry, just to clarify, is there an actual reduction in loss of energy, or just a more accurate picture in terms of how much energy you're gaining access to?
It's actually the real measurements that allows you to understand from where that losses come. I can be more technical, but before that, we do measurements and estimate the real numbers to understand where the losses come from. But now what we offer is digital and correct measurement, which can help you to reduce a lot of, almost half of your losses due to power quality.
Sorry, follow up. So is the hope that once you identify where the losses are coming from, that the energy company can then mediate, like fix those losses?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Maybe last question.
Yeah, what's the unit price on your
unit price is 4.5k euro per piece.
Per piece, and you
Yes.
charge how much?
What?
How much do you charge for it? Is it leased or is it owned by the consumer? The device itself.
Device, we produce this device. It's the price of one piece device. We're selling at this price.
So you sell it. What does it cost you to produce it?
It's about 1,000 euro.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Monty, please
Thank you,
introduce the
Carolina.
last speaker.
Our final presenter is Armin Sadie. He's the CEO and co-founder of Vicinity.
Hi everyone, my name is Armin, and today I'm going to let you know about why Cisco nominated us as one of the 5 startups to watch for in the UK. Downtime for industrial manufacturing plants is a nightmare, and it's mainly because industrial processes and infrastructure are out of date. They're complex to maintain, costly to operate, and vulnerable to security threats. In order to overcome these challenges and optimize their manufacturing plants, industrial organizations have realized that they need to bring cloud services and applications on-premise, or as the industry calls it, at the edge of the network. Now, there's a problem with that. It's harder to manage applications and software at the edge than it is in the cloud. And the reason why, you have to build mini clouds on location. And this is where Vicinity comes in. We're an infrastructure software that helps industrial organizations run reliable and secure applications on-premise. Essentially, we make it super easy to run these mini clouds on location. How does it work? We take care of the hardware, take care of the operating system, and all the applications running on premise. So it's the infrastructure layer that we take care of. In order to help industrial organizations run any type of application on any type of hardware. What we do is we bring the best elements of the cloud on the plant manufacturing floor, thus improving on security, reliability, and scalability, but all done on premise. The business model is straightforward. It's a platform as a service subscription model. We deal with industrial organizations with a go-to-market strategy focusing on partnerships with IT solution providers. We were granted a very important patent within the edge computing realm for creation of proximity-based and portable networks. Ever since we launched Vicinity 6 months ago, we've been quite busy. We're negotiating partnerships with IT solution providers, notably with IBM, who's looking to use Vicinity for their on-premise capabilities. And we have clients, notably Semapa, a large multi-billion industrial conglomerate that also invested in Vicinity. The market is massive and is growing on a daily basis. And it's mainly fueled because of the rapid adoption of industrial IoT and edge computing. And it's going to reach $900 billion in the next 5 years only. We're very excited about Vicinity's award-winning solution and patented solution to become a leading player in the infrastructure software category. Just don't take my word for it. They seem to think so as well. We're a team of second-time entrepreneurs. David takes care of everything that has to do with the technology. I take care of everything on the business side. And we're backed by an even stronger R&D team. Big things are happening in industrial manufacturing plants. It's all moving to the edge, and we're here to enable it. Thank you.
Thank you.
David will join me now for the questions.
Excellent. Questions?
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Who is your competitor, and what's the differentiation from your solution to what is on the market already?
Absolutely. So edge computing, if you look at it, is very vast. There's varieties. So you have it at the data center level, you have it at the mobile level. We're on the on-premise level. The main competitors there are two companies. One of them is Edgeworks and Zadata. And both differ in the sense that their markets are very different. We have a competitive advantage as well as the patent within the realm. This gives us a big strength in that. And the markets that they focus on. So Zadata focuses more on smart city industrial, whereas Edgeworks focuses more on smart vehicles, automated cars.
What's the impact of 5G on what you're doing?
It's actually beautiful. The idea of 5G is a variety of layers on top of each other, and the foundation is edge. So we're very happy for that.
So there's a category global impact. So the question is, how will the solution positively impact society?
It's a very good question. The solution itself, if you look at the technology behind what we built, it allows you to build any type of local networks practically anywhere. So if we take aside the industrial world that we're working on, we can deploy this in emerging markets to create networks where there's none available today. And we've actually did that in the past as well before we came to the industrial world. So there's a massive social impact towards what we're doing.
So platforms are inherently hard to sell, because you have to convince the client of your vision, you have to convince the client of the long-term commitment and so forth. What do you see as the average selling cycle for this technology into an average client? How long is this a land and expand strategy? Is this put the platform in and just show them a return on investment? What's the two things? So what's the average sales cycle time, and what's the kind of metrics to measure success?
Okay, so in regards to the sales cycle, it's about 4 to 6 months. And just to be clear, we focus on IT solution providers. So we're not selling to the industrial companies themselves directly. We go with the integrators and...
So it's a channels model?
It's a channel partner,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And the second question, if you can remind me?
Just how are they measuring success? I mean, is the sale a return on investment sale?
It's a return on investment sale, but also if you look at our direct clients, they don't have the full chain of solution to provide this to their clientele. So for us, the success is already there to begin with, but then it's a return on investment and also the downtime that they'll save because all the applications are being run on premise. So if anything happens, you can still run all the solutions without depending on the cloud.
Okay, very good. So time's up. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this session. I really did. 5 fantastic companies. I think the judges have a very difficult job to do. As we mentioned, the winners will be announced at the closing, so I hope to see all of you there. And let's thank both the speakers as well as our judges. And this concludes our session. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Round of applause for Carolina, please. Bit more, bit more. Thank you. Great job. We'll be back at 1:45 for Technology, Society and Democracy, which may be the most important panel of the whole show. So see you then. Enjoy your lunch. Goodbye.
I have to collect